She was the kind of woman who ran a billion-dollar company before most people finished their morning coffee. He was a man who hadn't let anyone past his front door in 3 years. One rainy Thursday night, fate shoved them into the same car, and neither of them walked away the same. What happened between Logan Pierce and Sienna Vaughn wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't planned. It wasn't convenient. And for a long time, both of them pretended it wasn't real. But you can only lie to yourself for so long before the truth stops waiting for permission. If this story finds you tonight, hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The rain came down hard enough to make the streetlights blur. Logan Pierce had been standing under the narrow overhang of Marcus Webb's front porch for almost 4 minutes, keys in one hand and his jacket collar turned up against the wind, trying to remember where exactly he'd parked. The neighborhood was one of those older residential blocks where every house looked almost identical after dark. Same brick facades, same iron railings, same amber porch lights catching the wet air in soft halos. He'd been here a dozen times. Tonight, for some reason, the street looked different, longer, more confused. Behind him, through the front door, he could still hear the last of the party winding down. Music that had gone from animated to low. Voices trading the comfortable back and forth of people who'd known each other long enough to run out of stories but still didn't want to go home. He hadn't wanted to be there in the first place. That wasn't entirely true. He'd wanted to see Marcus. Marcus Webb was the kind of old friend who made you feel like no time had passed, and Logan had known him since they were 19 years old and both working summer jobs at a warehouse north of the city, arguing about basketball and eating gas station sandwiches on lunch breaks. 22 years later, Marcus still called on a Saturday afternoon when he sensed something was off, still showed up at Logan's door with takeout and no explanation required. The dinner invitation had been warm and specific. Come, bring yourself, leave the rest at the door. And Logan had almost made it work. He'd lasted about 3 hours before the particular weight of being surrounded by couples started pressing down on him in that quiet way it did sometimes. Not jealousy exactly. Something closer to the awareness of an empty chair. Something that lived in the pause between other people's laughter. He'd said his goodbyes at 8:40, made it as far as the porch. The rain had other plans. He was scrolling through his phone, checking the text from his daughter's babysitter, confirming that Mia was already asleep, when he heard the door open behind him again. "You're still here," he turned. Sienna Vaughn was pulling on a light coat, a small bag over one shoulder, looking at the rain with the particular expression of someone who had dressed for a different kind of night. She wasn't wrong to look irritated. The coat wasn't built for this. He'd met her earlier in the evening, briefly, in the way you meet people at dinner parties when the introductions are happening all at once and everyone's still finding their feet. Marcus had made the round, Logan Pierce, an old friend, Sienna Vaughn, colleague from the downtown mentorship board. They'd exchanged maybe 6 words. She'd been polite in the direct, slightly distracted way of someone with other things on their mind. He'd been the same. Now she was standing 3 feet from him on a porch in the rain, studying the street. "Waiting it out," he said. "Does that work?" Historically, no. She almost smiled. It was very brief. A flicker at the corner of her mouth that she didn't seem to intend to show. She looked back at the street. "I can't get a ride. There's some kind of game tonight, apparently. Surge pricing is..." She checked her phone, made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's absurd." "Where are you headed?" "Midtown, West Side." Logan thought for a moment. He was going north, but not that far north. Midtown was on the way, more or less. "I'm driving that direction," he said. "If you want." She looked at him. Not for a long time, but long enough. The kind of look that was actually reading something, checking something, making a small internal calculation. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Another pause. The rain hit the porch overhang and ran off in a thin curtain. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." They found his car 2 blocks down, a dark gray Subaru that had seen 4 winters and still had a crumpled parking receipt wedged in the center console and a small purple hair tie around the gear shift. He noticed her noticing the hair tie and didn't explain it. It was Mia's. She had a habit of leaving them everywhere. Sienna sat with her coat across her lap and looked out the passenger window as he pulled into traffic. The wipers worked steadily. The radio was off. The kind of quiet that settles into a car between two people who don't know each other well enough yet to fill it with anything. He made it through the first light before she said, "How do you know Marcus?" "Since we were 19, we worked together before either of us knew what we were doing with our lives." "And now you know?" "More or less," he said. Then honestly, "Some days more, some days less." She nodded slightly, like that was an answer worth keeping. "You're on the mentorship board with him?" he asked. "I was," she said. "I stepped down from that about 8 months ago. Too much schedule conflict. He still invites me to things, which I think is either loyalty or optimism." "Probably both. That's Marcus." "You said that like you mean it." "I do." She shifted in her seat, turned slightly toward the window. The city moved past. Wet pavement, headlights reflecting in long orange streaks, a bodega on the corner with its lights full on, and a man in a yellow rain jacket locking up a bicycle outside. The ordinary texture of a Thursday night. "It was a nice dinner," she said. It didn't sound like she fully meant it. He glanced at her. "But?" "Nothing. It was nice." He let that sit. They moved through another block. "It's the couples," she said, quieter now. I'm not saying that badly. They're all good people. I like everyone there. It's just..." She stopped. "It's just a specific kind of thing," Logan said. "Yes. I know what you mean." She turned from the window and looked at him. "Do you?" "I've been the single person at Marcus's table enough times to have an opinion." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He means well." "Always." They passed through the lights at Decatur, and he took the left that would carry him toward Midtown. The rain was easing slightly, not stopping but thinning. He could see farther down the road. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "The hair tie. On the gear shift." He glanced at it. "My daughter, she's 7. She leaves them everywhere. I found them in the kitchen drawer, in my coat pocket. Last month I found one in my work bag, and I haven't figured out when she put it there." "What's her name?" "Mia." She nodded, said nothing for a beat, then quietly, "How old is she in your head when you're not with her?" The question surprised him. Not because it was strange, because it was exact. 7 going on 35, he said. "She was like that at 4, too." "I don't think it changes." Sienna smiled. This time she didn't pull it back. "My mother used to say that about me," she said. "I apparently skipped being a child entirely and went straight to being a small adult with complaints about inefficiency." Logan laughed. "A real one, the kind that comes before you've decided to make it." "What did you complain about being inefficient?" "Bedtime routines mostly, too many unnecessary steps." She paused. "I think I was 5. "That's alarming." "It's deeply alarming. My mother tells that story every Thanksgiving, and I still don't know whether to be proud or concerned." He grinned. She was watching him with an expression that was a little careful, a little warm, like she was deciding something. They crossed into the Midtown grid. He slowed for a red light, and she looked out the window again, this time at the building they'd stopped in front of. A high-rise going up on the corner, wrapped in scaffolding and construction lights. Still a skeleton. Still becoming something. "This is it?" he asked. She looked up the street. Then she said, "Actually, can you keep going a little?" He waited. "I'm not..." She stopped, started again. "I live 4 blocks from here, and I'm not ready to go back yet. The apartment is..." Another pause. "It's quiet in a way I'm not in the mood for tonight." He sat with that for a moment. "There's a place on Henley," he said. "Good coffee, open late. It's nothing special, small." "That sounds exactly right," she said. The cafe on Henley Street was the kind of place that didn't advertise. A hand-painted sign above a narrow door, 4 tables inside, a long counter, an older man behind it who nodded at Logan when they came in like he recognized him without being sure from where. The walls were painted deep green and there were plants on every windowsill, some of them thriving, some of them doing their best. A speaker in the corner played something low and instrumental, jazz maybe, or something adjacent. They were the only customers. Sienna sat across from him with both hands around her cup and looked around the room like she was taking inventory. She didn't seem uncomfortable with the smallness of it. If anything, she relaxed in a way that hadn't quite happened in the car. the slight easing of a posture that had been carrying something. "I like it here," she said. "I come when I need to think." "Does it work?" "Not usually, but the coffee is honest." She looked down at her cup. "Honest coffee, that's a low bar." "You'd be surprised." She smiled without looking up. Then she said, "What do you do?" "Marcus introduced you, but I wasn't—" She made a small gesture. My head was elsewhere. "Project manager, infrastructure development, mostly public sector. I coordinate the moving parts between contractors, municipal timelines, budget reviews. It's less exciting than it sounds, which is saying something." "That's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure," she said. "Something more—" She looked at him carefully, like she was trying to find the right word and wasn't willing to use the wrong one. "I don't know. You seem like someone who's done several things." "I have," he said. "Most of them I've stopped talking about." "Why?" He looked at his coffee. "Because the version of me that did those things felt like a different guy. It was a long time ago." She didn't push. He noticed that, the way she registered something and then made room for it instead of reaching into it. "What do you do?" he asked, although Marcus had said enough for him to have a general idea. "I run a company called Verata Systems," she said. "Data infrastructure and analytics platforms, mostly enterprise clients. Some government contracts now, which is—" She paused. "It's its own experience." "Good experience." "Expensive one," she said dryly, "which is not the same thing." "How long have you been running it?" 6 years. I co-founded it with a partner who left about 2 years in, so the last 4 have been—" She looked at the window, at the rain still tracing lines down the glass. "Heavy. You built it yourself, essentially." "I built it with 63 people who make it possible every day, and a board of directors who make it complicated every quarter," she said. "So, yes and no." He looked at her. There was something careful about the way she talked about her work, like she was proud of it and exhausted by it in equal measure, and had learned not to let those two things collide in front of people. "Do you like it?" he asked. "The actual work, not the resume version." She was quiet long enough that he thought maybe he'd pushed past where she was willing to go. "I like solving things," she said eventually. "I like the moment when something that was broken starts working again. I like the people on my team when they don't know I'm watching, when they're just doing the thing because they care about it." She paused. "I don't always like what it costs." "What does it cost?" She looked at him with an expression that was briefly, unexpectedly open, just for a second. A door cracked. "Everything I would have done with the time," she said quietly. "All the things I kept meaning to get to." He held that. Didn't respond immediately. Outside, a cab moved slowly through the rain. The instrumental track shifted to something slower. "I used to be like that," he said. Past tense. "Mia," he said simply. She nodded. "She reorganized your priorities. She reorganized everything, the whole system." He half smiled. "I didn't have a choice, and I'm grateful for that. I think I was heading somewhere pretty narrow before she came along." "Narrow how?" He thought about how to say it. "I was the kind of person who treated my whole life like a project, tracked the variables, hit the targets, optimized the outcome." He turned the cup in his hands. "I was very efficient at everything and present for almost none of it." "What happened?" "My wife got sick," he said. "We found out when Mia was 3 months old. The timing it was what it was. We had about a year and a half. And then I had Mia, and I had myself, and I had this choice about what kind of person to be while she was watching." The cafe was very quiet. Sienna looked at him. She didn't say "I'm sorry" the way people sometimes did, which was kind of them, but also meant they needed to say something and didn't know what. She just looked at him with eyes that understood that some things you don't put language around. "How old was she?" Sienna asked softly. "When—" 22 months, he said. "Mia. She doesn't really remember her mother, not in the way that makes memories, just in the way things get into you before you have words for them. She knows her somehow." "Yeah," he said, "she does." They sat in the particular silence that settles around something true. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. After a while, Sienna said, I haven't talked to anyone like this in a long time. Like what? She looked at the table. Like there's no performance required. He knew exactly what she meant. He'd forgotten somewhere in the last few years that that was possible. That you could sit across from a person and just talk, without the social scaffolding, without the agreed-upon version of yourself that you showed at parties. I'm sorry about tonight, she said. Being weird about my apartment. You weren't weird. I said I didn't want to go home. She made a small sound. I'm 30 years old. I run a company. That's not something a person with their life together says. A person with their life together can still not want to sit alone in a quiet apartment on a Thursday night, he said. Those things aren't related. She looked at him. Something crossed her face, small and brief and a little unguarded. Are you always this sensible? She said. Only when it doesn't cost me anything. She laughed, genuine, surprised by itself. It wasn't a big moment. It didn't feel like anything sliding into place, no cinematic recognition. Just a woman laughing at something he'd said in a coffee shop on a rainy Thursday, and him thinking that it had been a long time since he'd made a stranger laugh like that. They stayed until the man behind the counter started stacking chairs, which was the kind of polite signal that even Logan understood. He walked her the 4 blocks to her building. The rain had reduced itself to a fine mist that caught the streetlights and turned the air silver. She walked beside him with her hands in her coat pockets, and their conversation had gone easy. Back to lighter things, inconsequential things, the way good conversations migrate when the heavy ones have been given their space. At the entrance to her building, she stopped and turned. Thank you, she said, for the ride, and the coffee place. It's a good cafe. It is. She paused, looked at him for a moment like she was about to say something specific, then let it go. Say goodnight to Mia for me, even though she's asleep and has no idea who I am. I will, he said. She went in. The lobby swallowed her. Bright light, a doorman, the clean geometry of a building that cost more per floor than Logan earned in a year. The doors closed. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. He drove home through the wet streets thinking about very little. That was the thing. There was nothing to think about, really. A dinner he hadn't wanted to attend, a stranger who needed a ride, a coffee shop on Henley Street, a conversation that had gone somewhere he hadn't expected. That was all it was. He parked and went upstairs and checked on Mia the way he did every night. Opened her door 2 inches, watched the small geography of her breathing in the low light, listened for the particular sound of her that meant she was fine. And the world had not taken anything from her since he'd last checked. She was fine. He closed the door quietly. In the kitchen, he made himself a glass of water and stood by the window and looked at the city going about its business in the rain. The buildings across the street still lit on upper floors, the slow crawl of a late bus, the ordinary midnight of an ordinary city. He didn't think about Sienna Vaughn. He thought about what she'd said. Everything I would have done with the time, all the things I kept meaning to get to. And he thought about the expression on her face when she'd said it. The door cracked open, just for a second. He understood that. He hadn't talked to someone who understood that in a long time. He finished his water and went to bed. That Thursday, he didn't hear from her, and he didn't expect to. He hadn't given her his number. She hadn't given him hers. They had a mutual connection in Marcus Webb and a shared knowledge of a small cafe on Henley Street, and that was the total geography of it. Life filled in around it the way it always did. The alarm at 6:15, Mia's lunch to make, the school drop-off, the office, the morning brief, the project files stacked on his desk in the particular organized disorder that meant he knew exactly where everything was. A city infrastructure project he'd been managing for 11 months was approaching a critical milestone, and the week hit him like it always did. Fast, full, no room to breathe until Friday afternoon when everything went briefly quiet. He sat at his desk at 4 o'clock on Friday and looked at nothing for about 2 minutes. He thought about the cafe. He thought about the specific quality of that conversation, the ease of it, the way it had moved without any of the friction he'd gotten used to. He spent so much of his social life performing a particular kind of fine. I'm good, she's good, we're managing, it's a lot, but we're figuring it out. The standard issue summary he gave to people who cared but didn't know what to do with anything more complicated. Sienna Vaughn had not asked him to be fine. He'd just been something else instead. It was Marcus who connected them, without meaning to. 9 days after Marcus's dinner party, Marcus called Logan on a Sunday afternoon. The usual call, the checking in kind, and during it he mentioned offhandedly that he'd heard from Sienna, that she'd said she'd had a good evening despite herself, that she wasn't usually one for other people's social events, but she'd seemed genuinely glad she'd come. Logan listened and said nothing particular, but that evening he texted Marcus. "The coffee place on Henley. Does Sienna know it? I mentioned it the night of your dinner. I want to make sure I gave her correct directions if she ever goes." It was a slightly transparent excuse, and Marcus, being Marcus, almost certainly knew that. He replied 40 minutes later with a phone number and a single line. "Here, and you're welcome." Logan stared at the number for a long time. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Mia's school reading project spread out between them. A poster board that was supposed to represent her favorite book, which this month was a story about a girl who builds a robot to keep her company, and the robot turns out to need keeping company too. Mia was concentrated on drawing the robot with careful, serious attention. She had her tongue between her teeth the way she did when something required her full effort. She hadn't noticed him staring at his phone. He put the phone face down on the table. "Dad," Mia said without looking up, "your robot's eyes aren't level." He looked at the corner of the poster he'd been tasked with. She was right. "I was getting to that," he said. "You were looking at your phone." "I was doing both." "You can't do both. Eyes need concentration." She passed him the green marker with the gravity of someone handing over a surgical instrument. He fixed the robot's eyes. He texted Sienna Vaughn that evening, after Mia was asleep. "This is Logan Pierce. Marcus gave me your number. I told him it was about the cafe. I'm not entirely sure that was true. If you'd rather I didn't have your number, I understand." He sent it before he could overthink it, and then sat on the couch in the quiet apartment and did not look at his phone for 11 minutes. When he finally looked, there was a reply. "I'm glad Marcus gave it to you, and I'm glad you were honest about the cafe. There's a question I didn't ask Thursday night that I keep thinking I should have. Can I ask it now?" He typed, "Yes." She replied, "How are you actually doing?" Not the version you give people who ask as a greeting, the real one. He sat with that question in the quiet of his apartment for a long time. No one asked him that, or when they did, they asked it in a way that made it clear they expected the standard answer, and he delivered it, and everyone was satisfied. She was asking something different. He typed, "Some days I feel like I have everything under control, and I know exactly who I am and where I'm going. Most days I feel like I'm building a plane while flying it and hoping Mia doesn't notice the construction noise." He waited. She replied, "That's the most honest answer I've heard to that question in months. For the record, I think she probably notices and loves you for it anyway." He didn't know what to do with that. He looked at it for a while and then typed, "How are you?" Actually, her reply took longer this time, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Like something in the system needs maintenance and I keep postponing the appointment. But tonight, I feel better than I have in a while. I'm not sure when that started. He thought about that for a moment. Then he wrote, "Thursday." She didn't reply immediately. Then, after a pause, "Yeah, I think so." They didn't see each other again for 2 weeks, but they talked, texted mostly, and once for 40 minutes on a phone call that started as a logistical question about something Marcus-related and turned into a conversation about their respective terrible weeks and the particular comedy of things that go wrong at the worst possible time. She made him laugh on the phone in the same way she had in the cafe, the same quality of humor, dry and precisely aimed. He told her about the city project, the contractor who kept sending reports in a format no one could open, the meeting where 3 senior officials argued for 40 minutes about a decision that had already been made. She told him about a board presentation where she'd used a slide she'd been absolutely sure was correct until it wasn't, and the specific experience of watching 12 people look at you in polite horror. "What did you do?" he asked. I said, "That's wrong. I'll have the correct version to you by end of day," and moved to the next slide like it was intentional. Did it work? One of the board members came up to me afterward and said it was the most confident recovery he'd ever seen. A pause. He didn't know it wasn't intentional. I've let him continue not knowing. You've been living a lie for about 14 months, yes. He laughed. She laughed. And it was the same as Thursday. Easy, unperformed, the particular pleasure of someone who made you feel like the room had expanded. 2 weeks after Marcus's dinner party, he texted her on a Thursday morning. The cafe on Henley is better on Thursday evenings. I have no scientific basis for this. You should test it. She replied 40 minutes later between meetings, 6:30. He was there at 6:20. She arrived at 6:28, slightly out of breath, coat half on, saying, I had a call run long. I'm sorry, I ran the last block. And he'd said, you're early. And she'd said, the call ran long. And he'd handed her the coffee he'd already ordered for her because he'd remembered from the Thursday of the rain that she took it with oat milk and no sugar. She looked at the cup, looked at him. You remembered that? Practical memory, he said. Occupational habit. She sat down. She was slightly flushed from running, her hair not quite where she'd planned it to be. And there was something about that particular version of her, not the polished CEO he'd met at Marcus's dinner, not the careful public face, that was more real than both of those things combined. How was the call? He asked. Disastrous, she said. Tell me something good. Mia made a poster project for school this week. She drew a robot. Was it good? Technically accurate. She corrected my contribution. Sienna smiled into her coffee. I like the sound of her. She'd like you, he said. He said it without thinking. Then, she's particular about people. It's a compliment. I'll take it. They stayed 2.5 hours. When they left, she said, same time next Thursday? And he said, yes, without hesitating. That was how it started. Not with one thing, not with a moment, with a rainy night, a small cafe, and the slow accumulation of Thursdays that neither of them was willing to stop. The weeks that followed moved the way good weeks do when something is quietly shifting beneath the surface. Fast on the outside, changed on the inside. Logan told himself during those first Thursdays that it was a friendship. It was exactly what it looked like. Two people in their 30s who had ended up on the same side of the same kinds of exhaustion, finding that talking to each other was better than not talking to each other. That was allowed. That was normal. That was something a reasonable person could have without anything complicated happening. He told himself that every Thursday morning. By Thursday evening, sitting across from her while she told him about something that had gone wrong at work, or something that had made her laugh, or some memory from her childhood that had surfaced for no particular reason. He was not thinking about what it was or wasn't. He was just there, which was the thing that felt most unusual. He was just completely, entirely there. Sienna was not an easy person in the way that some people were easy, the kind who smoothed over surfaces and made everything frictionless. She had opinions that she stated directly. She got impatient with inefficiency, which she admitted freely and without apology. She could go quiet in the middle of a conversation when something had snagged her attention and she needed a moment to work it through, and she didn't feel the need to fill that silence with words. He respected all of that. But she was also, and this was the part he hadn't expected, profoundly attentive. When he talked, she listened in a way that felt like the whole room tilted toward him. She remembered specific things he'd mentioned weeks earlier and circled back to them without announcement. She asked follow-up questions that proved she'd been thinking about something he'd said long after the conversation had moved on. Nobody had paid that kind of attention to him in a very long time. He noticed somewhere in the 4th or 5th Thursday that he was starting the week looking forward to the end of it. Not because the week was bad, the weeks were ordinary, but because Thursday was there at the end of it like something you'd earned. He told himself that was normal too. And it was. Probably. It was also, slowly and without his permission, beginning to feel like something else entirely. The night he figured that out, not the full thing, just the edge of it, was a Thursday in November when Mia had a cold. The cold wasn't serious, just the low-grade, sniffly kind that meant she needed to stay home and be checked on and couldn't go to school. His regular sitter wasn't available. His backup wasn't picking up. He'd texted Sienna at noon to say he might need to cancel. She'd replied, I could come to you. He'd stared at that for a full minute. "You don't have to do that," he'd typed. "I know," she replied. "What is Mia like when she's sick? Movies or books or both?" She arrived at 6:30 with soup from the Thai place that Logan had mentioned once, 4 months ago in a completely different context, and a small paperback that she said she'd liked as a kid and thought might work for a 7-year-old who was basically 35. Mia, tucked into the couch in her pajamas, with a box of tissues and an expression of faint theatrical suffering, looked at Sienna with the particular directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to be polite about assessments. "You're the one Dad goes to coffee with on Thursdays," Mia said. Logan opened his mouth. Sienna crouched down so she was at eye level. "I am," she said. "I'm Sienna. You're Mia." "He talks about you," Mia said. "Good things, I hope." "He said you have a good memory for people." Sienna looked sideways at Logan, briefly. He was extremely interested in the middle distance. "That's true," she said. "What kind of soup do you want first, the noodles or the clear broth?" Mia looked at her options with appropriate seriousness. "Noodles." "Good choice." She stayed 3 hours. They watched most of an animated movie that Mia had seen twice already, but insisted on like a comforting ritual. Mia fell asleep 40 minutes before the end, slumped against Logan's shoulder in the particular complete bonelessness of a child who has given up fighting it. Sienna and Logan finished the movie in near silence, with the volume low, and when it ended she helped him carry Mia to bed with the wordless cooperation of two people who didn't need to talk it through. In the kitchen afterward, while he made tea, she stood at the counter with her hands around a mug and looked at him. "She's wonderful," she said. "She's a lot," he said. "But yes." "The books she has on her nightstand, she's really reading those? The one on the bottom is a middle-grade novel. She's 7. She reads ahead of level. I have no idea where she got that from. Her mother, probably. Claire was..." He paused. "Claire read everything. She had books in every room of the apartment, including the bathroom, which I complained about, and now I would give a lot to complain about again." Sienna was quiet. The kitchen held it. "I would have liked to know her," she said. It wasn't a performance of sympathy. It was simple and direct, and it landed somewhere in him that he hadn't expected. "She would have liked you," he said. She had very little patience for people who weren't genuinely themselves. She could tell in about 4 minutes. "You'd have passed." He looked at his tea. "You would have argued about management philosophy. She had very strong opinions." "I would have lost." "Probably not." Sienna smiled. A real one, warm. She left at 10:30. He walked her to the door and she paused in the hallway and turned and looked at him for just a moment. That quiet look he'd learned to recognize, the one that was measuring something and not giving it away yet. "Thursday?" she said. "Thursday," he said. He closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. He didn't try to name what was happening. He let it sit there, undefined and warm, the way things feel before you've put words on them, before the words make it real enough to lose. He went to bed. He listened to the city outside his window. He was, he thought, in a significant amount of trouble. The trouble with something you don't name is that it keeps growing anyway. December arrived the way it always did in this city. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch between autumn and the kind of cold that makes the morning feel like a commitment. Logan started keeping a heavier coat by the door. Mia went through 2 pairs of mittens in the first 2 weeks, losing one from each pair in separate incidents that she described as mysteries. He found one behind the radiator. The other was simply gone. Life moved in its ordinary way. The infrastructure project hit a bureaucratic delay that cost him 3 days of rescheduled meetings. Mia's school had a winter concert where she played a recorder with the focused determination of someone performing surgery, and Logan sat in the 3rd row with his phone on silent and felt the specific fullness of watching your child take something seriously that they've only just learned. He took 2 videos and sent the better one to Marcus, who replied with 4 exclamation points and a voice message of himself laughing. He also sent it to Sienna. That was Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the rainy night at Marcus's dinner. He sent it without thinking. A clip of Mia in her small blue sweater, tongue barely between her teeth, giving the recorder her complete professional attention. And only after it delivered did he register that sending your kid's school concert footage to someone was a particular kind of thing. She replied 12 minutes later with, "She is absolutely serious about that recorder. I respect it completely. Tell her the second measure was the best." He showed Mia the message at breakfast. Mia read it, chewing her toast. "The second measure was the hardest," she said. "That's the one I almost messed up." "Do you want me to tell her that?" Mia considered. "Tell her I know." He relayed this. Sienna replied, "She and I understand each other." He put his phone away and went to work, and the morning felt lighter than it had started. It was around this time that something in their Thursday arrangement quietly shifted. Not in the way they talked, that had always been easy, unusually easy, the kind of conversation that didn't require maintenance. The shift was subtler than that. It was in the duration, in the pattern, in the way Thursday stopped being a thing they arranged and became something they assumed. The cafe on Henley was their default, but they'd started moving beyond it. On the second Thursday of December, Sienna mentioned she hadn't eaten since noon, and they ended up at a small Italian place 3 blocks over where the tables were cramped, and the bread came out immediately, which Logan considered a good sign in any restaurant. They ate for 2 hours and stayed for another 40 minutes after the plates were cleared, talking about things that had nothing to do with work or obligation. The following Thursday, she called at 5:30. He was still at his desk, the office nearly empty, and said she had a donor event she had to attend at 7. Did he want to walk for an hour before she had to go? He said yes, and met her on the corner of 4th and Market, and they walked along the waterfront with their coats buttoned to the top, the winter sky going pink and gray over the river, and she told him about a problem she'd been carrying around for 2 weeks that she hadn't said out loud to anyone. "The head of our product division wants to restructure the engineering team," she said. "He has a case for it, a decent case. The numbers support it, on paper. But the 2 leads he wants to move out, they're not dead weight. They're the people who have held the institutional knowledge together through 3 pivots. You let them go, you lose things you can't put in a spreadsheet. Relationships, tribal knowledge, the understanding of why we made certain decisions 3 years ago that will matter again in 2. Does he know that? He knows it intellectually. He doesn't feel it. He came in 8 months ago, so he didn't live through the pivots." She was quiet for a few steps. "The thing is, he's not wrong about the inefficiency. The structure is bloated in places. I can see what he sees. She stopped, looked at the river. "You don't think the solution is worth the cost," Logan said. "I think the solution is incomplete," she said. "I think he's identified a real problem and proposed a fix that solves one thing and breaks 2 others, and I'm trying to figure out how to tell him that without making him feel like his judgment is being dismissed, because he's good, and I want to keep him." Logan thought for a moment. What does he care about most? Not professionally. What drives him? Efficiency, clean systems. He hates friction. Then show him the friction the restructure creates downstream. Don't argue about the people. That's an emotional argument, and he'll discount it. Give him the process cost, the ramp time for replacements, the knowledge transfer gaps, the client relationship risk. Make it a systems argument. She walked in silence for a moment. "That's exactly right," she said. Then, with a slight look, "I already knew that, I think. Sometimes I need someone to say it back to me." "That's what I'm for," he said. She looked at him sideways. There was something in that look, brief, warm, and then gone, folded back into the conversation, that he filed away and didn't examine. "How's the project?" she asked. "In bureaucratic purgatory until January. Someone submitted the wrong form, and we can't move the approval until it gets corrected, and the person who needs to correct it is on leave." That's a very specific kind of misery. It's a genre. I've been in it before. You learn to find other things to do with your hands. Like walk along the river at 5:30 with a person who's using you as a sounding board. Exactly like that. She smiled. The river light was going gold and thin. The city rose up on the far bank with its evening lights just beginning to come on, floor by floor. At 6:40, she said she had to go, that she'd get a cab from the corner, and he walked with her to the corner, and they stood there for a moment in the cold. "The donor event," she said, is going to be one of those evenings where I shake 40 hands and remember 6 names and smile at jokes that aren't funny and stand in a room that costs more per hour than most people's rent. She said it without self-pity, just as inventory. But this part of the night was good. The part where you walked in the cold and complained about your product director? The part where I didn't have to pretend to be fine, she said. The cab came. She got in. He watched it pull away and stood on the corner for a moment with his hands in his pockets. It was 32 degrees, and he was not in any hurry to move. He told Marcus about the Thursdays in mid-December, in the oblique way that men sometimes tell their closest friends things they haven't fully admitted to themselves. They were at a sports bar near Marcus's office, the kind of place with bad lighting and excellent wings and a television in every corner showing 3 different games at once, and Marcus was eating with the unhurried satisfaction of a man who had nowhere to be. "You see her every week," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "Most weeks," Logan said. "Every week," Marcus said again, like he was just confirming his notes. "She's easy to talk to." "Uh-huh." "Don't do that." "I'm not doing anything," Marcus said. "I'm eating a wing." "You're doing the face." "I don't have a face." "Marcus." Marcus put the wing down, wiped his hands, looked at Logan with the patience of a man who had known him for 22 years and understood how long it sometimes took for Logan to arrive at the obvious. "I'm not saying anything," Marcus said. "I'm just noting that in 3 years, 3 years, Logan, I have not once heard you talk about a woman the way you're currently not talking about Sienna Vaughn. I'm not talking about her in any particular way. You called me last Tuesday to tell me she had an interesting take on municipal infrastructure funding. It was interesting." "I believe you," Marcus said. "I just want to make sure we both understand what category of conversation that was." Logan looked at his beer, said nothing. "She's a good person," Marcus said, quieter now. "I've known her about 2 years. She doesn't let many people in. She's careful. It's been a hard few years for her, building that company, and she doesn't always show it, but it cost her a lot. She's particular about who she trusts." "I know," Logan said. "Do you know she talks about you differently too?" He looked up. Marcus raised both hands, the expression of a man who has said his piece. "I'm just eating wings. I don't know anything." Logan did not push for more, and Marcus did not offer it. But he drove home that night with something sitting in his chest. Not quite hope, which felt presumptuous, but something adjacent to it. The awareness of a door that might not be entirely closed. He pushed it to the back of his mind where it could wait patiently without causing any trouble. Chat. Christmas broke their Thursday rhythm for 2 weeks. Sienna flew to the Pacific Northwest to spend the holiday with her parents and a younger brother who lived there with his family, and Logan took Mia to his sister's house in Connecticut, which was warm and full and exactly the right amount of chaotic. Mia ate too much pie and stayed up past her bedtime 2 nights in a row and came home slightly feral and completely happy, which Logan considered a successful holiday. His sister Dana pulled him aside on the last evening and said, the way only a sibling can, "You seem different. Less in your head. What's going on?" He said, "Work's calmed down." Dana looked at him with the expression she'd been deploying since they were children, the one that communicated, "I know you're not telling the truth, and I've decided not to push it right now." "Work," she repeated. "Okay." He texted Sienna on Christmas Eve. "Mia has informed me that Santa's logistical operation is actually pretty impressive from an infrastructure standpoint." Direct quote. She is 7 years old. He was sitting on Dana's back porch when the reply came, half an hour later, the sounds of his sister's household behind him. "Tell her she's right. The cold chain management alone is remarkable. Ask her what she thinks the per-stop efficiency model looks like." He read this twice and then started laughing in a way that steamed in the cold air and brought Dana to the back door to see what was wrong. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing. Go inside." She looked at him, said nothing, went inside with an expression that filed something away. He and Sienna texted for 20 minutes on Christmas Eve, with Mia's increasingly technical questions about Santa's operations, which Sienna answered with straight-faced seriousness and genuine thought, and by the end of it Mia, who had been reading over his shoulder without his knowledge for the last several exchanges, looked up and said, "She's smart." She is, Logan said. Mia nodded with the gravity of a final ruling. I like her. He put his phone in his pocket. He liked her too. He liked her considerably. He liked her in a way that had stopped being simple somewhere around November and had not gotten any simpler since. And every time he came close to sitting with that fact directly, something in him pulled back. Not from fear of Sienna, from the particular vertigo of caring about someone new when you'd spent years believing that particular door was not one you'd walk through again. Claire had been gone for 5 years. He knew, in the clear daylight way that you know something after enough time, that the rest of his life was still in front of him, and that it was possible, intended even, to find joy again. He knew it. He didn't always feel it. And the distance between knowing something and being able to actually do it was where most of his stalled moments lived. Sienna Vaughn was not making the distance feel smaller. She was making it feel, for the first time in years, worth crossing. That was the more frightening version of the same problem. Molzi. January opened cold and clear, and the Thursdays resumed. They had dinner at the Italian place on the first Thursday back, and Sienna arrived with her hair slightly different. She'd cut it, not dramatically, but enough that he noticed immediately and said so, which made her touch the back of her neck in the way people do when they're not sure whether they made the right call. It's good, he said. It looks like you. What does that mean? I'm not sure exactly, just, it fits. She lowered her hand and looked at him in that sideways way. That's either the most or least useful compliment I've received. I'll workshop it. Please do. She'd had a difficult 2 weeks, not in the catastrophic sense, but in the wearing way, the kind of tired that accumulates. The product director's situation had been resolved, mostly in the direction she'd hoped, but navigating it had cost her several late nights and one genuinely unpleasant board call that she described as an hour of people talking in circles and calling it governance. A major client had flagged concerns about a contract renewal. 2 members of her engineering team had caught a winter bug at the same time, which had collapsed a critical sprint at the worst possible moment. He listened to all of it, not passively. He asked questions, pushed back in places, offered the kind of direct assessments she'd come to rely on from him because he gave them without flattery and without the protective softening that people applied when they wanted to be helpful without being uncomfortable. The client concern, is it legitimate or is it leverage? He asked. 60% legitimate, 40% leverage, she said. He wants a pricing review, which is reasonable. The contract is 2 years old. But the way he's framing it is designed to create urgency that doesn't actually exist. So give him the legitimate 60% and hold the line on the rest. I know that. She pressed her fork against the edge of her plate. I know all of this. Some weeks I get tired of knowing what to do and still having to do it. Yeah, he said. That sounds ungrateful. It sounds human. She looked at him. You do that a lot. Do what? Take something I say that sounds like a complaint and locate the reasonable part of it. She paused. Like you're on my side before I've even made my case. He thought about that. I think I usually am, he said. The words landed somewhere between them and sat there, neither of them moving to pick them up or put them away. She looked down at her plate. He refilled her water glass because it was empty. Tell me something about Mia, she said. Something good. She decided she wants to learn to cook, he said. Real cooking. She watched a video about French omelets and she announced at breakfast that we were going to learn the technique together. Did you? We tried on Saturday. We produced something that was technically edible but had the structural integrity of a regret. She decided the problem was my egg cracking and spent 20 minutes on form correction. Sienna pressed her lips together, failing to not smile. Who was correcting whom? At this point, I'm not sure who's teaching who anything, he said. She asked me last week why certain roads have potholes, but others don't, and by the end of the explanation, she had a follow-up question that I needed 10 minutes to answer correctly. I have a master's degree, and a 7-year-old is stress testing my knowledge base. She sounds like someone who's going to run something someday. She sounds like someone who might take over the world before she's old enough to vote, he said. And honestly, I think it'd be managed well. Sienna laughed. The surprised kind, the real one. And Logan felt it the way he always did, that warmth that came from making her laugh, which was entirely disproportionate and which he had stopped pretending to himself was neutral. After dinner they walked, because they had started doing that, finishing dinner and then walking without explicitly deciding to, as if the evening needed more of them before it was willing to end. The January air was clear and cold, the city at that particular midweek quietness, cabs sliding past and the lit windows of apartments making a quilt of small golden squares above the street. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You always ask if you can ask. I want to give you the option to say no." "Okay," he said. "Ask." "When you think about the future, not Mia's future, yours, what do you see?" He was quiet for half a block. "That's not a small question." "I know, you don't have to answer." "No, He thought about it. Really thought about it, not the shorthand answer. "For a long time I didn't think about it at all. The future was just an extension of the present. Keep Mia healthy and secure, keep the work stable, keep the structure intact." He looked at the street ahead. "Lately I think about it differently." "How?" "Like it might have more in it than I planned for." She was quiet beside him. Their steps fell in the same unhurried rhythm on the pavement. "I stopped thinking about the future a while ago, too," she said. "At some point, the company became the whole picture, which I did that. I made that choice. I'm not sure when I stopped noticing I'd made it." "Do you regret it?" She was quiet for a beat. "I regret the things I traded away without realizing they were trades," she said. "Not the work itself. The work matters to me. But somewhere in building it, I think I told myself I'd find the personal things later, that there'd be a later." "Is there?" She looked at him. The streetlight caught the side of her face and she looked like herself, exactly like herself, the careful and the warm and the tired and the real. "I'm starting to think there might be," she said. He didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't be too much or too little, so he said nothing, and she didn't seem to need him to. They turned back toward her building without discussing it, the way you navigate together when you've stopped needing to negotiate directions. At the door of her building, she turned and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner?" "For listening, for—" She stopped. "For being someone I can be honest with. I don't take that for granted." "I know you don't." She looked at him for one more beat, that measuring look that he'd learned to wait through, and then she said, "Good night, Logan." "Good night." She went inside. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment, the city moving around him, and thought about the future and what it might have in it, and the woman who was making him consider it in the first place. He was still in trouble. He had stopped minding. February arrived and the Thursdays kept accumulating, each one a link in a chain that neither of them had agreed to build, but both of them kept adding to. On the first Thursday of February, Sienna met Mia properly for the first time since the sick night on the couch. Logan had a school pickup conflict, a late meeting that ran long, the kind of scheduling collision that single parents learn to solve or panic about, and that week Logan was low on backup options. He mentioned it to Sienna the evening before, not as a request, just as context, in the way he'd started sharing the texture of his week with her. She said, "I can get her." He started to say no. She talked over it. "I finish at 2. The school lets out at 3:15. Give me the address. Tell the school I'm on the approved list, and I'll get her to your place and she can do homework until you're out of the meeting. It's an hour." "Sienna, I know you're going to say it's too much. It's not too much. I'm offering." He thought of 5 reasonable objections and dismissed all of them and said, "She's going to interrogate you." "I've survived board reviews," Sienna said. "I can handle a 7-year-old. What he came home to at 5:15 was the kitchen table covered in a project about weather systems that Mia had apparently decided to turn into a comprehensive illustrated guide to meteorological phenomena, and Sienna sitting across from her, looking at the drawings with genuine attention and asking questions that Mia was answering with great authority. Neither of them looked up when he came in. "Dad," Mia said, "did you know that cumulonimbus clouds can go up to 60,000 feet?" "I did know that," he said. "Sienna didn't. Now she does." "I'm learning a lot," Sienna said, and when she finally looked up at Logan, there was something in her expression, warm and slightly helpless and entirely unguarded, that lodged in his chest and didn't leave. They made dinner together, the three of them, in the slightly chaotic way that cooking with a 7-year-old inevitably went. Mia was assigned pasta stirring duties and took them extremely seriously. Sienna turned out to be a competent cook in the focused, slightly improvised way of someone who'd learned out of necessity rather than instruction. And she and Logan moved around the small kitchen with the unconscious ease of people who had somehow, without planning it, figured out each other's rhythms. At one point they reached for the same wooden spoon, and her hand landed on his, and neither of them moved for a second. Just the briefest pause, the warmth of contact, and then Mia said, "The pasta is boiling over," and the moment passed into the ordinary stream of the evening. But he felt it. He knew she did too. After Mia was in bed, they sat in the kitchen with wine and the quiet that settles over an apartment once a child is asleep. The kind of quiet that has texture to it. That means something. "She's extraordinary," Sienna said. "She has good days and very opinionated days, and sometimes those are the same day." "Tonight she asked me what my biggest professional failure was," Sienna said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." "I answered her." She smiled. "I told her about a product launch 3 years ago that I was certain was right and turned out to be wrong in 4 different ways simultaneously. She listened very carefully and then said, 'But you fixed it, right?' And I said yes, and she said, 'Then it was a learning, not a failure.' Directly. Like she was reporting a fact." He looked at her. "She said that to you." "Word for word." He sat with that. It was such a Claire thing to say. The vocabulary of it, the calm and certain reframe. He'd said things like that to Mia 100 times, and apparently they had gone somewhere in her, taken root, come back out of her mouth when needed. "She sounds like her mother sometimes," he said. "Tell me." So he did. Not the whole story. They'd covered most of it, piece by piece, over months of Thursdays. But in the particular quiet of that evening, with the wine and the ordinary evidence of a shared dinner still on the table, he talked about Claire with a directness that he didn't often manage. Claire's voice, the way she used to read standing up, leaning against the counter with a book in one hand and coffee in the other, unwilling to sit because sitting meant stopping, and she hated stopping. The way she laughed, which was loud and unself-conscious, and came from somewhere entirely genuine. The way she had looked at Mia in those last months, with a love that was also grief, and also something harder than either of those things. Sienna listened the way she always did, without performance, without the gentle redirection some people applied when they got uncomfortable with someone else's loss. "She left you the best version of herself," Sienna said quietly when he'd been quiet for a while. He looked at her. His throat was doing the thing it did sometimes, the tightening that didn't get to become anything. "Yeah," he said. "She did." Sienna looked down at her glass. Then she said, with the careful honesty of someone choosing to give something rather than keep it, "Being around the two of you is the least lonely I've felt in a very long time." He heard that land. He felt the weight and the truth of it. "Same," he said, for the record. She looked up. In the kitchen light, in the quiet apartment, she looked like someone who had stopped bracing, the way a person looks when they've been holding something tense for a long time, and something has finally said you can put it down. He was not going to say anything else tonight. He knew that. They were both still working up to the version of this conversation that mattered most, and they weren't there yet. He could feel how close they were, and he could also feel exactly how careful they both needed to be getting there. He refilled her glass. She smiled at him. The night wound down slowly, in the unhurried way that evenings sometimes do when no one is in a rush to be anywhere. She left at 11. He cleaned the kitchen and turned off the lights and went to check on Mia and stood in the doorway in the dark and listened to his daughter breathe. Something in the future, his future, the one he'd stopped planning, was starting to take a shape he recognized. He just wasn't ready to name it yet. The thing about carrying a feeling you haven't named is that it eventually gets heavy enough to show. March came in wet and restless, the kind of month that can't decide what it wants to be. Warm one morning, bitter by afternoon, the sky cycling through its moods with no particular concern for the people underneath it. Logan had learned to keep a light jacket in his work bag and a heavier one by the door, and accept that he'd choose the wrong one roughly half the time. Mia thought this was evidence of poor planning. He thought it was evidence of an unpredictable climate. They had this argument approximately twice a week, and neither of them was winning. Life at the office had picked back up. The infrastructure project, freed finally from its bureaucratic delay, was moving again, and moving fast, which meant Logan's weeks were full of the particular controlled urgency he was good at: tracking variables, managing the gap between what contractors promised and what they delivered, writing reports that were honest without being incendiary. He was good at his work in the way people are good at things they've done long enough to stop noticing the effort. What he noticed more, lately, was the shape of his week around Thursdays. Not the Thursday itself, the approach to it. The way Monday felt like orientation, and Tuesday like settling in, and Wednesday like the midpoint, and Thursday like the destination. He'd caught himself twice checking his phone on a Wednesday afternoon for a text that wasn't due until tomorrow. He'd stopped doing it, but the impulse remained. He and Sienna had been texting most days by now. Not constantly, but he was running a company, and he was managing a project that had developed several unexpected complications, and neither of them was the type to perform connection with a running stream of messages that didn't say anything, but regularly. The kind of communication that becomes part of your day's texture without being the center of it. A thought in the middle of a meeting that felt more like hers than his. A photograph she sent of something she'd seen on her lunch walk. A window display, an unusual cloud formation, once a pigeon that had somehow acquired a small piece of pretzel and was handling the situation with notable determination. He'd kept the pigeon photo. That was probably information. Sienna, meanwhile, was navigating a period at Verada that she described to him on a Thursday in early March as the productive kind of chaos, which doesn't feel different from the destructive kind until it's over. The company had landed a significant new client, a regional healthcare network that had been in their pipeline for over a year. And the win had triggered a cascade of internal realignment that was both good news and an enormous amount of work. New hiring, system integration timelines, a partnership announcement that the board wanted handled with specific precision that required 3 drafts of the same press language and 2 rounds of legal review. She was under a microscope in a way she hadn't been in some time. Not uncomfortably, she said. She knew how to operate under scrutiny, but it was tiring in the way that being watched always was, even when nothing was wrong. Logan listened and understood more than he could have explained. There was a version of performance he recognized in her life that matched something in his, the maintenance of a particular face that said, "I have this under control," even on the days when control was a generous word for what was actually happening. "Do you ever just let yourself be bad at it for a day?" he asked. They were at Henley, the usual table, the usual green walls with the usual struggling plants. The man behind the counter had started having their orders ready approximately 5 minutes after they arrived, which Logan had noticed and said nothing about. Sienna looked at him. Be bad at it. Not catastrophically, just let yourself have a day where you don't run the whole system at peak capacity, where something slides and you let it slide. That's not how it works when other people are depending on the output. I know. I'm asking if you ever do it anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, she said. On Thursdays. He looked at her. Not in a bad way, she said quickly. Then she stopped and looked at her cup and said, more honestly, I mean, here, I don't run anything. I don't have to. You don't need me to be... She searched for the word functional in any particular direction. You just need me to show up. That's all I need, he said. She nodded slowly, looked at her hands. That sounds simple, and it's actually the hardest thing, she said. He knew exactly what she meant, the relief of not being needed to perform, the weight of how rarely that relief was available. I know, he said. She looked up at him, and something in her expression was very open, very unguarded, and then she shifted and said, Tell me about the project. And he let her change the subject because she needed to, and the conversation moved and the evening continued. But he kept that. Here I don't run anything. He kept it the way you keep something that tells you more than it was designed to. The announcement broke on a Tuesday. Verada Systems and the Callaway Healthcare Network were formalizing a 3-year enterprise partnership. The press release went out at 9 in the morning, and by noon, it had been picked up by 4 business publications, and a national tech outlet that ran a feature not just on the deal, but on Sienna, her trajectory, her company, her profile in the industry. It was the kind of coverage that companies spent years trying to generate. Logan saw it on his phone during a site visit, standing in a hard hat at the edge of a road section that was 3 weeks behind schedule. He read the article twice. The photograph at the top was from a recent industry conference. Sienna, in a dark blazer at a podium, looking like herself and also like the version of herself that the world saw when the cameras were pointed at her. Composed, sharp, every line of it intentional. He texted, "Just saw the Callaway announcement. The article is good. You should be proud." She replied 40 minutes later, "It's a good deal. The article is a lot." He thought about that phrasing, a lot. Not great or exciting, a lot. "How are you?" he sent. Her response took almost an hour, which meant she was in back-to-back calls. When it came, it said, "Ask me Thursday." He would. By the time Thursday arrived, the coverage had expanded. A second article, this one more profile-focused, had run in a business magazine. Her LinkedIn had apparently erupted. The company's client inquiry line had been busy all week. Her communications director, who Logan had heard about frequently enough to feel like he knew the man, had sent her a 12-item media brief on Wednesday morning that she'd forwarded to Logan with no commentary except a single period. He understood the period. She arrived at Henley 8 minutes late, which was unusual. She sat down, pulled off her scarf, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had been in motion for 6 consecutive days and had not fully stopped yet. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She looked around the cafe, breathed. "Okay," she said. "I'm here." "You're here." The man behind the counter brought her coffee without being asked. She wrapped both hands around it and closed her eyes for 2 seconds, which was the most completely still he'd seen her in weeks. "How are you, actually?" he asked. She opened her eyes. "Overwhelmed?" she said. "Not in a bad way? Or, it's good, the deal is good, the attention is useful for the company. I know all of that. It's just..." She rubbed the edge of her thumb across the cup. "It got big very fast, and I haven't had a minute to just sit in it and know how I actually feel about it." "How do you actually feel about it?" She thought for a real moment, not the press answer. "Proud," she said. "Really genuinely proud. And then immediately scared that I said that because the moment you let yourself feel good about something is the moment it gets complicated. That's not how it works. I know that intellectually. But you've been burned before." She nodded, set the cup down. "The last time we had a big win, 2 years ago, a federal contract, there was a celebration, and 6 weeks later we were in the middle of an implementation crisis that almost cost us the client. So I've trained myself to eat." She stopped. "To not celebrate until you're sure the ceiling's not going to fall," he said. "Something like that." He leaned forward. "The ceiling might fall, Sienna. It falls sometimes. That doesn't mean the win isn't real." She looked at him for a moment, the look that measured. Then quietly, "You're very annoying when you're right. I've been told." "By who?" "Mia, primarily." That got her. The tension in her shoulders dropped a half-inch. She picked her coffee back up and looked at him the way she had been for months, directly, warmly, with that current of something underneath that he'd been carefully not identifying. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yes. This week, all the calls, the coverage, the board calling to say congratulations. My communications director acting like we've entered a new era." She paused. "All of it was fine. It was good, even. But the only part of this week I was actually looking forward to was tonight." The cafe was quiet. The jazz from the corner speaker moved through a slow progression. "Me too," he said. Neither of them said anything else about it right then. It was enough to have said it. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was a door that had been ajar for months, and they had both just walked up to it and stood there, neither one reaching for the handle yet, but both of them knowing it was there. The evening moved in its usual direction after that. Dinner at the Italian place, the walk, the slow drift back toward her building. But the texture of it was different, slightly charged. The way the air changes before a weather system arrives, when everything looks the same, but something has shifted underneath. Walking along the waterfront, she slipped on a patch of wet pavement near the river walk railing and grabbed his arm to catch herself, and he caught her automatically, and then they were standing very close together with his hand on her arm and her hand on his jacket and the river moving dark and cold behind her. "Okay?" he said. "Fine," she said, but she didn't step back immediately. She looked at him from close range, and he looked at her, and the city kept doing what the city did, unaware, indifferent, ongoing, while neither of them moved. She stepped back, let go of his jacket. "Careful," he said. It came out quieter than he'd meant it. "Always," she said. It came out the same. They walked the rest of the way in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable and wasn't uncomfortable. The charged kind. The kind that means something is accumulating that hasn't decided how to arrive yet. 2 weeks after the Callaway announcement, Sienna called him on a Sunday morning. He was making pancakes. Mia was at the table behind him, nominally setting the table but actually reading a book about ocean ecosystems that she'd gotten from the library 3 days ago and was already 70 pages into. When he saw Sienna's name on his phone, he felt the small lift of it, that response he'd stopped arguing with, and stepped into the hallway. "Hey," he said. "Hi." Her voice was different, flatter than usual, not upset exactly, contained. "What's wrong?" A pause. "Nothing's wrong. She stopped. Started again. "A journalist called my communications director this morning. Wants to do a longer profile piece, career, company, personal life, the whole thing." "Okay," he said, and waited. "The personal life part is the part," she said. "Marcus's dinner was apparently noticed by someone. The two of us leaving together. And there have been..." Another pause. "Apparently there are people who've seen us walking, together. Someone with a phone." He leaned against the hallway wall, processed that. "I wanted to tell you before it became something," she said, "in case it does. I don't know what the piece will be or if he'll include anything. Marcus said he'd never talked to the journalist. It might be nothing, but if it isn't nothing, it's okay," he said. "Logan, Sienna, it's okay." A long pause. He could hear her breathing, could hear the faint sound of her apartment in the background, the particular quiet of a Sunday morning in a space you've occupied alone for a long time. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer honestly." "I will." What are we?" She said it with the directness of someone who has decided to stop circling. "Because I need to know before someone else decides for us. I need to know what this is, what to protect." He stood in his hallway with the smell of pancakes burning slightly in the kitchen and Mia's voice saying, "Dad, the pancakes," from the other side of the wall, and he thought, this is it then, the moment where you either say the true thing or you don't. "Hold on," he said. He put the phone down, went into the kitchen, moved the pan off the heat, told Mia 2 minutes, and went back into the hallway. "You still there?" he said. "I'm here." He took a breath. "I don't know what the word is," he said. "I haven't been able to find the right one. But what I know is that you are the most important person in my week. You have been for a long time. I think about what I want to tell you before I tell anyone else. I look forward to Thursday the way I look forward to..." He stopped. "I don't know what it is, Sienna. I know what it feels like. And I think you know too." The silence on the other end was long enough that he thought for one terrible second that he'd misjudged everything, every look, every conversation, every moment by the river. Then she said very quietly, "I know." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Neither of them said anything more for a moment. "I'm sorry I asked it like that," she said. "By phone on a Sunday." "Don't be. It was the right question." "I was scared to ask it in person." "I know." "That's embarrassing. I run a company." "You can run a company and still be scared to ask someone how they feel about you," he said. "Those aren't related." She made a sound, half laugh, half exhale, the tension leaving. "You do that thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you make the unreasonable thing sound completely reasonable." "Dad!" Mia's voice with more urgency now. "I have to go rescue breakfast," he said. "Go." A pause. Logan? Yeah. Thursday? Thursday, he said. He went back into the kitchen. Mia looked at the pan and at him and said, with the studied patience of someone who had been waiting, "You burnt the edges." "I know. They're still good. The edges are the best part. I'll do better next time." She looked at him for a moment. The Mia look, the one that was always reading something slightly more than the surface of things. "Who were you talking to?" "Sienna." Mia accepted this, went back to her book. "Is she okay?" "She's good," he said, and then, because it was true and because his daughter deserved honest things, "She's really good." They didn't meet Thursday that week. Sienna had a board dinner she couldn't move, and he had a school thing for Mia, a science fair that Mia had been preparing for with focused intensity for 3 weeks. They texted instead, which had its own particular quality now. Something had changed in the language of it since Sunday morning. The slight carefulness they'd maintained with each other, that small gap you keep when you're not sure whether your wait will be welcome, had dissolved. Not loudly, just quietly, the way things that have been braced against something relax when the thing they were afraid of turns out to be safe. She sent him a message at 9 on Thursday night. How was the science fair? She got first place in her category, he wrote. I may have cried a little. Very briefly. Under control. You absolutely cried. Under control. There's no under control version of watching your kid win something. He smiled at his phone in the empty school parking lot. Mia asleep against the car window beside him. The purple ribbon clutched in both hands, even in sleep. What was the project Sienna sent? Cloud formation and weather prediction. She built a model that tracked local pressure systems and temperature variations. She presented it to 3 judges and apparently answered follow-up questions for 8 minutes. A pause. Then, that's my girl. He looked at those 3 words for a moment. The ease of them, the ownership in them, which was not possessive but something warmer and more deliberate. The particular claim of someone who has chosen to belong to something. He drove home carefully, Mia sleeping in the back seat with the ribbon still in her hands, and thought about Sundays and phone calls and questions asked before someone else decided the answer. Boom. The profile article ran on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of March. Logan read it at his desk with his coffee going cold beside him. It was a good piece, mostly. Thorough on the company, fair on the industry context, generous without being hagiographic. There was a photograph of Sienna at her office desk, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was clear and steady and entirely her. The caption named her as one of the region's most significant technology executives under 40. Near the end of the piece, there were 2 lines, not a headline, not even a paragraph. Just, Vaughn, who is notably private about her personal life, has been seen in recent months in the company of a companion the publication has not been able to identify. Sources close to the company confirm only that Vaughn seems happy. He read those 2 lines 3 times. Sources close to the company confirm only that Vaughn seems happy. He put his phone down, picked it up again, set it face down on the desk. He sent her a text. Read the article, 2 lines near the end. I saw them, she replied. Are you okay with it? He thought about it honestly. The public nature of it. His name not in it, but the implication clear enough for people who were looking. What it might mean going forward, if they were... Yes, he wrote. I'm sorry I can't control what gets written. I know. I'm not asking you to. He paused, then added, For the record, I don't care who knows. Her reply took a moment, then, I don't either. Not anymore. His project manager knocked on the open door at 10, something about a revised timeline that needed his attention, and he put his phone in his drawer and went back to work with the full knowledge that something had quietly and permanently changed. He wasn't running from it. That was new. Mothin, he told Marcus on a Saturday afternoon 2 days after the article. They were at the sports bar again. Same bad lighting, same excellent wings, same 3 games on the TVs. Marcus listened the way Marcus always listened, without interrupting, without making the face he absolutely had a face for, eating at a steady and unconcerned pace. When Logan finished, Marcus picked up another wing and said, Okay. Okay? Yeah, okay. Was I supposed to be surprised? He looked at Logan. I gave you her number 8 months ago, and I had a feeling then. Logan, I've watched you not talk about this woman every time we've spoken since October. The only surprise is that it took this long. We didn't know what it was. You knew what it was. You just needed time to say it. Logan looked at the table. I wasn't sure I was ready. Marcus's expression shifted, quieter. Because of Claire? Partly. He turned his glass. I'm not carrying it wrong. I know that. I've done the work. But when you've lost someone you built a whole life with, and then you start feeling like you might want to build something again. He stopped. It's not guilt. It's weight, Marcus said. Yeah. Because it means something. Because it means you're choosing again, and choosing again is serious. Yeah. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, she would want this for you. You know that. I know that. And Mia? Mia already decided. He thought of his daughter at the kitchen table, looking at Sienna's text about the science fair, asking without looking up. Is she coming over this week? She's ahead of us both, Marcus laughed. Real, warm, the laugh of a man who'd been waiting a long time for a specific version of this conversation. She's been ahead of you since she was 3 years old. You said so yourself. Logan smiled. It was the kind of smile that felt unguarded, the kind that meant something had loosened. So what happens now? Marcus asked. I don't know exactly, Logan said. We haven't said it out loud, in person. There was the phone call, but you need to say it in person. I know. So say it in person. I'm aware that's the thing that needs to happen, Marcus. Then stop eating wings with me and figure out when. Logan looked at him. I drove here. I'll get a cab. Marcus waved a hand. Go figure out your life. I'm fine. He didn't leave that minute. He finished the wings and they talked about other things and he paid his half and drove home. But the conversation had cleared something, the way conversations with Marcus always eventually did. Not by resolving anything, just by making the path visible. He needed to say it out loud. He just needed the right moment. The right moment did not arrive on schedule. The following week was the worst one Sienna had at Verada in several months. The healthcare client, the one they'd just announced, the win, the deal that had generated all the coverage, surfaced a technical integration issue on Monday morning that turned out to be larger than the first assessment suggested. Not a crisis, she insisted when she called him Monday night, but not nothing either. The engineering team was on it. She was monitoring it closely. The client was not panicking, but the week was going to be difficult. He listened. He asked the right questions. He said nothing that wasn't useful. He did not say what he'd been building towards saying, because the moment she needed him to be something specific, he was that thing. And the version of that she needed this week was someone steady and clear on the other end of the phone, not someone adding weight to her plate. She worked late all week. They texted. He brought her coffee to her office building lobby on Wednesday evening without telling her he was coming, just a text that said downstairs, 5 minutes, if you have it. And she came down in her work clothes, slightly frazzled, and stood with him in the lobby while she drank it and gave him a 10-minute summary of the situation, and he listened and said, You're handling it correctly. Trust your team. What if they miss something? Then you catch it. That's what you do. She looked at him. The lobby hummed around them. Security desk, revolving doors, the late evening departure of the last employees. I'm glad you're here, she said. Simple and direct. I know, he said. Just as simple. She went back up. He walked home through the cold evening and thought about timing, about patience, about how some things couldn't be forced into a shape before they were ready, and how the waiting was not nothing. The waiting was its own kind of statement. By Friday, the integration issue had been contained. She texted him at 6:30. Crisis officially downgraded to a significant inconvenience. Team was brilliant. I owe them all a dinner. Good, he replied. Then, are you free tomorrow afternoon? She replied in 3 minutes. Yes, there's a place I want to show you. The Canal Walk, East Side. 2:00. A pause. Okay. He put his phone down and looked out his kitchen window at the March sky going dark over the city. Tomorrow afternoon. The canal where the light came off the water in the late afternoon and the city felt quieter than it had any right to. He was going to say it tomorrow, out loud, in person. He was ready. He was willing to admit to himself at last, completely terrified. Not of her answer. He was fairly certain that he knew her answer, terrified in the way you are before something real, the appropriate kind of fear, the kind that means you've chosen something that matters enough to be frightened of losing. He went to check on Mia, who was already asleep with the library book face down on her chest and the purple ribbon from the science fair hanging on her bedpost where it had been since the night she won it. He moved the book, turned off her lamp. She stirred slightly and said, without fully waking, "Is Sienna coming tomorrow?" He stood in the dark doorway. "Yeah," he said quietly, "she is." Mia made a small sound of satisfaction and turned over and went deeper into sleep. Logan stood there for another moment. Tomorrow afternoon, the canal. He was ready. The canal walk on the east side of the city was not a famous place. It didn't appear in travel guides or weekend recommendation lists. It was a stretch of maybe half a mile along an older waterway that the city had renovated about a decade ago, with new stone pavement and iron benches and trees planted at intervals that had grown thick enough now to make a reasonable canopy in summer. In March they were still bare, the branches holding the pale afternoon light in a loose net overhead. The water moved slowly, dark and gray-green, reflecting the sky in long, unsteady stripes. Logan had found it 3 years ago on a long, aimless walk with Mia, back when she was 4 and going through a phase of needing to physically exhaust herself before she'd sleep, which had meant a lot of late afternoon walks to nowhere in particular. They'd ended up here and she'd thrown 7 rocks into the water with grave ceremonial focus, and then fallen asleep on his shoulder on the way home. He'd come back alone a few times after that. It was the kind of place that didn't ask anything of you. He arrived at 1:50 and stood at the iron railing above the water and watched the current for a while. His heart was doing something annoying. He'd spent a reasonable adult life not being a nervous person. He was constitutionally measured, the kind of man who did better with problems than with waiting because problems had variables and waiting just had time. He was not good at standing still while something was approaching. But here he was, standing at a canal railing at 1:50 on a Saturday afternoon, with his hands in his coat pockets and the city moving quietly around him, and the complete knowledge that in about 10 minutes something was going to change. He heard her footsteps on the stone path before he saw her. She was in a dark coat, a scarf looped twice around her neck, her breath coming slightly fast like she'd walked quickly. She saw him at the railing and slowed to her normal pace, and he turned and they stood about 6 feet apart for a moment in the way of 2 people who have already said more than they intended to and are now facing the geography of what comes next. "Hi," she said. "Hi, how was your morning?" "Quiet," she said. "Weirdly quiet. I didn't know what to do with myself, which probably says something I don't want to examine too closely." She came to stand beside him at the railing and looked at the water. "I've walked past this area 100 times and never stopped. Most people don't. They're lost." She looked at the trees, the light, the water moving with its mild indifference. "It's good." "Yeah." They stood for a moment. The canal moved below them. Somewhere down the path a dog was being walked, its nails clicking against the stone, its owner's shoes following at the unhurried pace of someone with nowhere particular to be. He'd rehearsed, in the abstract way that you rehearse things you can't actually script, the shape of what he wanted to say, the order of it. He'd thought about the canal in the afternoon light and how this was the right place to say the thing that needed to be said. He'd thought about being clear and direct and not circling. What he said, when he finally opened his mouth, was, "I've been thinking about Sunday." The phone call. "Yeah." He looked at the water. "I said I didn't have the word for it. I've been thinking about that. Because I think that was partly true and partly—" He stopped. "Partly me being careful. Keeping a door I could retreat through if I needed to." She was quiet beside him, listening in the particular way she did, her whole attention given over. "I don't want to retreat through it," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm in love with you." He said it simply, without preamble, looking at the water. Then he looked at her. "I don't know when it happened exactly. I don't think there was a moment. I think it was all of it. All the Thursdays, all the phone calls, the coffee, the walk in January when you said the only part of your week you'd been looking forward to was tonight. I think it was Mia's sick night and the pancakes on Sunday and the photograph you sent me of the pigeon. He paused. I know that last one sounds... I know which pigeon, she said. I know you do. He turned to face her fully. I'm telling you this clearly and in person because you asked me a real question on the phone and you deserved a real answer and I gave you a partial one. This is the rest of it. Sienna was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not exactly. Or maybe he had, in pieces, in partial glimpses across cafe tables and kitchen counters and evening streets, but never all assembled at once like this. Open, undefended. The particular look of someone who has stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I've been in love with you since November, she said. Probably before that, but November is when I stopped being able to pretend it was something else. She looked at the water briefly and then back at him. The night I brought soup when Mia was sick. I drove home thinking I was in serious trouble, and I sat in my parking garage for 10 minutes before I went inside. You sat in your parking garage? For 10 minutes. Why didn't you vote? Because I was scared, she said. Straightforwardly scared. Not of you. Of... She pressed her lips together, finding the word. Of needing something. Of building something on a person and having it be wrong. I've made that mistake and it cost me, and I promised myself I wouldn't... She stopped, looked at him. And then it was already too late to promise myself anything because I'd already done it. I'd already built something. I just hadn't said it. I know, he said. I'd done the same thing. I know you had. They stood facing each other at the railing with the cold afternoon air moving around them and the canal below carrying its slow traffic of light and shadow. And it was not the kind of moment that came with music or ceremony. It was just two people in their coats on a stone path on a Saturday saying the true thing to each other at last. He reached out and took her hand. She turned her palm up and laced her fingers through his. Not a beginning, more like a door that had been standing open for months and had finally, with no particular drama, been walked through. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They stood like that for a while, watching the water. The dog had passed. The afternoon light was doing what March light does in the mid-afternoon, going sideways and golden and casting long, soft shadows across the stone. I have to ask you something, he said. I know what you're going to ask. Do you? She looked at him. Mia. Yeah. I know what she means to you. I know she's not a secondary consideration. I know she's the thing you protect first, always, and you need whatever this is to be safe for her. She said it steadily, without resentment, without the particular edge of someone who's accepted a condition reluctantly. She said it like she understood it completely. I'm not asking you to choose or rank anything. I just want to be in the picture, whatever that looks like. She already put you in the picture, he said. She's been there since November. You know that. I know, but you need to say it. So say it. I want this, he said. All of it, whatever it is. I want to figure it out with you in it. She squeezed his hand. Then let's figure it out, she said. Figuring it out, as it turned out, was not a single conversation or a single decision, but an accumulation of smaller ones that happened over the following weeks and months, with the slightly bumpy reality of two people integrating into each other's already built lives. The easy parts were genuinely easy. The texting, the Thursdays, the natural rhythm they'd already established. None of that changed except that it expanded, took up more space, stopped pretending to be something smaller than it was. He introduced her formally to Marcus as his girlfriend, which was a word that felt strange and also entirely right, and Marcus shook his hand and then hugged him in the way of a man who had been waiting a long time to make that gesture. The harder parts were real. The first was public. 3 weeks after the canal, a photograph appeared online. Someone's phone, someone at a restaurant where they'd had dinner, someone who recognized Sienna and apparently decided that the man across from her holding her hand was worth noting. The photo was grainy and indistinct, but clear enough. It appeared on 2 social media accounts and was picked up by a gossip-adjacent industry site that ran it with a headline about Sienna Vaughn's mystery companion. Logan saw it on his lunch break on a Tuesday and sat with it for about 5 minutes. He had known, in the abstract, that this was possible. He was a project manager from a middle-class neighborhood who drove a 4-year-old Subaru and picked up his daughter from school. He was not a public figure. He did not want to be. And the woman he was in love with was, increasingly, someone the world was paying attention to. He texted her, saw it. She called immediately. "I'm sorry, I know this is—" "It's fine," he said. "Logan, I mean it. I'm not hiding. If someone takes a picture of us at dinner, that's—" He thought about how to finish it. "That's what happens when one of us is who you are. I'm not interested in pretending in public and then being something different in private. That's not a life." A pause. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Are you okay?" "My communications director is having a small stroke in his office, but yes, personally, yes. Tell him it'll be fine." "He doesn't find that reassuring from me right now." "Tell him from me then." She made that sound, the half laugh, the exhale, and he could feel her steadying on the other end. "Okay," she said. "Okay. You don't have to manage what I think about this," he said. "You don't have to protect me from it. It's going to happen, and we're going to be fine, and the only thing I actually care about is making sure Mia is shielded from it." "She will be," Sienna said, with a firmness that came from somewhere that wasn't performance. "I promise you that. Her name is not going anywhere near any of this." "I know," he said. He'd known that before he said it. He just needed to say it. The picture became small news for about 3 days, and then the news cycle moved on, which was what the news cycle did when it found nothing particularly scandalous in 2 people eating dinner together. Logan's name circulated briefly in a couple of comment sections. Someone found his professional profile. There were opinions, as opinions always existed on the internet, ranging from warm to dismissive to a particular variety of commentary about what a man like him was doing with a woman like her that he found both irritating and weirdly satisfying to ignore. He told Mia about the photograph before she could find it some other way. He sat on the edge of her bed on a Wednesday night after she was already in pajamas and said carefully that he and Sienna were more than friends now, and that some people might say things or ask things because Sienna was well known in her work, and that if anyone at school said anything, she should tell him. Mia listened with full attention. Then she said, "Are you happy?" He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on her bed with the purple ribbon still on her bedpost, looking at him with Claire's directness and a patience that was entirely her own. "Yeah," he said, "I really am." She nodded like this confirmed a hypothesis. "I told Sophie at school that my dad's girlfriend runs a company." "You—" "Mia, when did you tell her that?" "A while ago." She picked up her book. "Sophie's dad works at a bank, so I thought it was interesting." He opened his mouth and closed it. "Good talk, Dad," Mia said, and opened her book. He got up. He was smiling in a way that had gotten slightly out of control. The second hard thing was internal, and it came for him alone on a Sunday in late April. He'd been in Sienna's apartment for the first time that week. She'd had dinner catered for the 3 of them, a deliberate and slightly formal gesture that became loose and comfortable within the first 20 minutes when Mia discovered that Sienna had a terrace, and that the terrace had a view of 3 city bridges, which was more bridges than Mia had considered a realistic residential option. They'd spent 40 minutes on the terrace discussing bridges while Logan leaned in the doorway and watched the 2 of them at the railing and felt something vast and quiet moving through him. But Sunday, back in his own apartment, he sat in the kitchen in the early morning quiet and hit a wall he hadn't fully expected. It wasn't doubt. It wasn't regret. It was the particular grief that sometimes arrives sideways, without warning, wearing ordinary clothes. A Sunday morning, the apartment quiet, the chair across the table where Claire used to sit with her standing up coffee and her book and her loud laugh. He missed her. He missed her in the specific way that didn't go away, the way that coexisted with everything else without asking for permission or timing itself conveniently. He sat with it for a while. Didn't fight it. Didn't try to logic it into something manageable. Just let it be what it was. The weight of love that has nowhere left to go and so just lives in you, permanent resident. And then, after a while, he picked up his phone and called Sienna. She answered on the 3rd ring, slightly groggy with sleep. "Logan, it's 7:15. "I know. I'm sorry. I just—" He stopped. A pause. She understood something from the quality of his silence. Are you okay? Yeah, he said. I'm fine. I just needed to hear your voice for a second. A longer pause. I'm here, she said. Simple. No interrogation, no alarm, just, I'm here. He closed his eyes. Go back to sleep, he said. I'll call you later. Logan, I'm fine. I promise. She was quiet for a moment. Do you need me to come over? No, I just... He looked at the kitchen, the empty chair, the ordinary Sunday. Some mornings are what they are. She understood. He knew she did. She'd heard enough across enough Thursdays to know the landscape of it. I know, she said softly. Take your time with it. I'm not going anywhere. Thank you. Call me later. I will. He sat in the kitchen for another hour. Then he made breakfast. Then Mia woke up and came in with her hair horizontal and her socks on the wrong feet and said she wanted to try the omelet again, this time with proper technique. And he said okay, and they got out the pan together, and the morning became what mornings were allowed to become. He called Sienna at noon. She answered on the second ring. How are you? She asked. Better, he said. Good, actually. Good. Mia made an omelet. It was technically correct and better than mine. I'm not surprised. I'm slightly surprised. I've been cooking longer. She has better focus. That's deeply unfair and entirely true. He looked out the kitchen window at the April sky, which was finally doing what April was supposed to do. Blue, light, the trees beginning to come back into themselves. Thank you for this morning. You don't have to thank me. I want to. I'm not used to... He paused. I'm not used to someone just being there, without needing it to be a bigger thing than it is. That's just what it is, she said. That's all. That's a lot, he said. She was quiet for a beat. Yeah, she said. It is. Spring moved through the city with its usual disregard for the timelines of people trying to catch up to their own lives. By May, Sienna had met Logan's sister Dana, which happened over a dinner that was either strategically arranged or accidentally inevitable, depending on who you asked. Dana had driven down for a Saturday visit with her husband and her 2 kids, and Logan had said, I want you to meet someone in the direct way that meant he'd already made a decision about this and wasn't presenting it for debate. Dana and Sienna had sized each other up in the first 4 minutes with the particular focus of 2 women who both cared about the same person and needed to determine whether they were allies or not. It had resolved, by the end of the first hour, into something warm and complicated and genuinely mutual. They'd ended up in the kitchen together while Logan managed the children on the terrace, and when he came back in for water, Dana had been saying something about Logan at 19 that made Sienna laugh, the real laugh, the surprised one, and he'd stopped in the doorway and thought, this is what it looks like when it's working. Afterward, Dana had pulled him aside in the hallway. Her eyes were doing something he recognized. The older sister assessment, which was always a little too accurate. She's good, Dana said. I know. She's serious. I know. You're good too, together. He looked at his sister. I know, Dana. She looked at him for a moment, then she said more quietly, Claire would agree for what it's worth. He held that. Yeah, he said. She would. Dana squeezed his arm once and went back to the table. He stood in the hallway for a moment, alone, and felt the particular fullness of a life that had found its way back to something. The summer brought new complications and better ones. Sienna's profile had continued to rise, which was good for Virata and meant that her schedule was increasingly something managed from the outside. Speaking invitations, board inquiries, industry events, the proliferation of claims on her time that came with visible success. There were weeks when Thursday was genuinely difficult to protect, and they had to fight for it against competing obligations, which they both found irritating in a way that confirmed something important about their priorities. In July, a competitor of Virata's began a quiet campaign of what Sienna called positioning, and her board called concern, and Logan privately called something that didn't need to be said out loud. A rival company had been publicly dismissive about Virata's healthcare pivot, and there were industry whispers, the careful, deniable kind, that questioned the durability of the Callaway partnership. Nothing actionable, nothing provable, Just the slow weather system of competitive interference that large-scale business generated at altitude. Sienna handled it the way she handled most things, with precision, without performance, and with the occasional cost of bringing home more weight than she'd intended. Logan had learned by now to recognize the version of her that walked through the door on those evenings, the slightly compressed quality, the first 20 minutes of dinner where she was still in the previous conversation, the moment when something shifted and she came back to the room. He'd learned not to push, not to probe, to give her the 20 minutes and let the decompression happen naturally. One evening in late July, she came to dinner straight from a board call that had gone long and sideways, and she sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, before the food was even on the plates, "I hate that I bring this home to you." He looked up. "Don't." "I mean it. You have your own work, your own—" "Sienna." He set down the serving spoon. "Look at me." She looked at him. "This is what this is," he said. "This isn't a version of you that I'm tolerating. This is just you. Wednesday nights after a bad board call are part of the deal. You don't owe me a curated version of yourself." She held his gaze. Something behind her eyes did that thing. The door, cracking. "I keep waiting for you to have a limit," she said quietly. "I don't have a limit on you." "Everyone has a limit." "Then I haven't found mine." He held her look. "And I've been paying attention." She looked away first, at the table, at her hands. When she looked back up, something had gone out of her face that had been there a long time, the brace of it, the faint expectation of something arriving wrong. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "You don't have to do anything with me," he said. "You can just have me." She was quiet for a moment, then very softly, "That's the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me." "I know. Because it means it's real. It's real." She nodded slowly, looked down at the table. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in the way they got sometimes. Not tears, not quite, just the surface of something that ran deeper. "Okay," she said. He picked up the serving spoon. "Now eat something before it gets cold." She laughed, the helpless real one. The one he'd been making her produce since October in a rainy car in a cafe on Henley Street. The one he'd spent almost a year collecting like evidence. Mia turned 8 in August. Logan planned the party with his usual systematic approach, and Sienna appeared in his kitchen 2 days before the party to help with the cake, which she had offered to make on the grounds that she had a specific competency in this area, and which Logan had agreed to on the grounds that he absolutely did not. The cake, when it emerged from the oven, was a legitimately impressive 3-layer lemon cake, with the kind of clean lines that suggested the person who made it had thought carefully about architecture. Mia inspected it the following morning with the focus of a structural engineer. "The layers are even," she said. "Thank you," Sienna said. "That's hard to do." "It is." Mia looked at the cake and then at Sienna and then at the cake again. "Can I learn?" "Yes," Sienna said, "but you have to let me run the kitchen." Mia considered this. "Okay." Logan stood in the doorway of his kitchen, watching the two of them stand over a birthday cake at 8 in the morning with the gravity of two people negotiating the terms of something important, and he thought, this is it. This is what a life you didn't plan looks like when it's the one you would have chosen anyway. The birthday party was chaos in the good way. 8-year-olds and high-volume noise and 3 separate incidents involving balloons that Logan chose not to investigate. Sienna circulated with the ease of someone who had stopped being a guest and become something else, something without a clean category name but recognizable by its texture. She knew where the extra napkins were. She knew which of Mia's friends was allergic to what. She knew that the music needed to be turned down at 3 o'clock or the energy would tip past a recoverable threshold. Logan watched her and thought about rainy nights and parking garages and all the Thursdays that had accumulated into this kitchen on this August afternoon. And he thought about naming things and what it meant when you chose them deliberately with full knowledge of the weight. That evening, after the guests had gone, and Mia was asleep with one birthday balloon still tied to her wrist and the purple ribbon still on her bedpost, He and Sienna sat on the couch with the particular exhaustion of a well-used day. She had her feet tucked under her and her head leaning slightly against his shoulder, and the apartment was quiet in the way it was quiet after Mia was asleep. Inhabited, warm. "I love her," Sienna said. Not announced, just said. The way you say something when it stops being a thought and becomes a fact. He took that in. "She loves you," he said. "She decided about 6 months ago. She just didn't tell you directly because she wanted to be sure you were serious." Sienna looked up at him. She was vetting me. She's always vetting people. It's a feature. And I passed. "With marks," he said. The cake probably clinched it. She settled back against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The city continued its work outside the windows, indifferent and ongoing, and inside this apartment on this specific night, there was something that neither of them needed to describe to know exactly what it was. He'd been afraid of it for a long time. The weight of choosing again, the vertigo of putting your life alongside someone else's and trusting that the ground would hold. But this was what the ground felt like when it held. This quiet, this particular warmth, this woman with her head on his shoulder, and the city outside and his daughter asleep down the hall with a balloon on her wrist. He pressed his lips briefly to the top of her head. She made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound, the kind that means I know, me too. And didn't move. They sat like that until the city outside went fully dark, and the building settled around them, and neither of them was in any hurry to be anywhere else at all. September arrived with the particular clarity that follows a long summer. Cooler air, sharper light, the city seeming to shake itself awake after months of heat and haze. The trees along the canal walk began their slow turn from green to the first uncertain yellows, and the water below them carried the sky's new blue in long unbroken strips. Logan walked that stretch most Saturday mornings now. Not always with purpose, not always with destination. Just the walk itself, the way it had become part of how he thought. The canal and the iron benches and the trees and whatever state the season had put them in. The city sounds at a half remove. He'd brought Mia here dozens of times. He'd brought Sienna dozens more. Occasionally all three of them came, which had its own rhythm. Mia ranging ahead on the path with the energy of someone who had not yet learned to conserve herself. Sienna beside him. Their conversation running at the comfortable pace of two people who no longer needed to fill every silence and no longer feared the ones they left alone. He thought sometimes, walking here, about the man he'd been 2 years ago. Not with nostalgia or self-criticism, just as a kind of orientation. The way you check your position on a map, not because you're lost, but because knowing where you started tells you something true about how far you've come. 2 years ago, he'd stood at Marcus's front door in the rain, trying to remember where he'd parked, wanting to be anywhere but a party, carrying the particular weight of a man who had done the right things for long enough that he'd almost forgotten what wanting something for himself felt like. He didn't have trouble remembering that now. What he remembered specifically was the morning in October when he'd stood in his kitchen after Sienna had left and thought, I am in a significant amount of trouble. He'd meant it as a warning to himself. It had turned out to be a description of something good. The trouble as it happened was the thing worth having. Tocham. The question he'd been carrying since August made its first appearance on the surface on a Tuesday evening in mid-September, during dinner at the Italian place that had become as much theirs as any place could become a person's. They'd been together almost 18 months now, from canal walk to kitchen to birthday cake to the slow dailiness of two lives, learning to move alongside each other. And the dinner had been easy, the way dinners were easy now, conversation moving between his project update and her board news, and Mia's most recent declaration that she wanted to study atmospheric science, which she had announced with the certainty of someone who has decided and does not require input. She's 8, Sienna had said. She's been 8 for 3 weeks, and she's already selected a field, Logan said. I've stopped being surprised. She asked me yesterday whether I thought data infrastructure would be relevant to climate modeling. He looked across the table. She asked you that. She wanted to know if there were applications. I gave her an honest answer, which is yes, significantly, and she wrote it down. Sienna picked up her wine glass. She has a notebook. I know about the notebook. It started after the science fair. He paused. It's a lot of notebook. I looked at 2 pages. It's organized by subject with her own indexing system. Sienna looked at him with an expression that was half fond and half something that lived adjacent to awe. Logan, she's something else. She is, he said. Simple. The way certainty sounds when it's had years to settle. He looked at Sienna across the table. The particular warmth in her face when she talked about Mia, the way it was completely unperformed, the way it had arrived without announcement and established itself as fact. And the question he'd been carrying since August moved in his chest, requesting attention. Not tonight. He knew that without deliberating. Not across a restaurant table between the pasta and the check. The question deserved its own moment, and he knew which moment he wanted. He was patient. He'd always been patient when it counted. October came. 1 year exactly from the night of Marcus's dinner party and the rain in the cafe on Henley Street. The night that had been the beginning of everything without announcing itself as such. Logan noted the anniversary in the private way he noted most things. Not ceremonially, but with the full awareness that some dates deserve to be recognized, even quietly, even just internally. Sienna noted it too. He knew because she texted him on the morning of the 8th of October with a single line, 1 year ago tonight you offered me a ride in the rain. He replied, best decision I've made in years. She replied, you drove me to a cafe and let me not be fined for 2 hours. It seemed like what you needed. It was exactly what I needed. A pause, then, thank you. I know I've said it before. You can keep saying it. I plan to. Another pause, longer. Thursday? Henley, he sent. 6:30. I'll have your coffee. She replied with nothing but the briefest acknowledgement, and he went to work feeling the particular warmth of a life that had become, without his fully tracking the moment of its becoming, exactly what he wanted it to be. They met at Henley that Thursday. The same green walls, the same plants, some thriving now, after 2 winters, some still doing their determined best. The man behind the counter had their orders ready before they sat down, which had ceased to be notable and become simply part of the texture of the place. They stayed 3 hours, which was also simply part of the texture of it. Walking back toward her building afterward, the city in its October dark, Sienna said, I've been thinking about something. Okay, he said. Virata is doing well. The healthcare partnership is ahead of schedule. The board is... She paused. The board is satisfied, which is about the best possible outcome with that particular group of people. That's good, he said, and waited. I've been thinking about the next 2 years. Strategically. Where the company goes, what we build toward. She was quiet for half a block. And I keep running into the same thing. What thing? I keep thinking about what I want the personal part to look like, she said. Not the company version, not the 5-year plan, the actual thing. And every time I try to picture the future, you're in it, you and Mia. She said it directly, the way she said most things that mattered. I'm not saying this to pressure anything. I'm saying it because I've been honest with you about everything else, and it seemed to be... Sienna, he said. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. I know, he said. She looked at him. The October streetlight caught her face, and she looked like herself, careful and warm and direct. The woman who had sat in a cafe 1 year ago and told him about all the things she'd meant to get to, who had arrived at his door with soup for his sick daughter, who had stood in his kitchen and made a birthday cake with the focused precision of someone who understood that love was mostly acts of specific attention. I'm not going to be subtle about this, she said. I know, he said. I'm counting on it. She looked at him, a question beginning in her expression. There's a place I want to take you, he said. This weekend, Saturday afternoon. The canal? The canal. She held his look for a moment. Something moved through her face that she didn't entirely control. Hope, maybe, and the brace against hoping, and then the deliberate release of the brace because she'd done enough bracing for one life. Okay, she said. Okay. He walked her to her door. She went inside. He stood on the sidewalk in the October night, and the question in his chest was no longer restless. It had settled. It knew when it was getting what it had been waiting for. Saturday came with the particular quality of mid-October days that do everything right, cool and clear, the light low and angled, the trees along the canal in their full autumn turn, every shade of amber and copper and the specific red-orange that always seemed slightly unreal against a blue sky. Logan arrived first, the way he always did. He stood at the railing above the water and watched the light come off it in long, shifting patterns, and thought about 6 months ago, standing in this same spot with his heart doing something annoying, saying out loud for the first time what had been true for much longer than he'd admitted. The question he was carrying today was heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because it was permanent. The kind of choice you make once with your eyes open and live with in every direction. Forward, sideways, the accumulated weight of every ordinary Tuesday and difficult Friday and birthday party and late night and Sunday morning that would follow it. Lighter because he was certain. Not the aggressive certainty of someone who hasn't considered the complications, but the quiet certainty of someone who has thought about every version of the question and arrived at the same answer each time. He heard her footsteps on the stone path. She was wearing a dark coat, lighter than the one from last March. Her scarf, the warm amber color that matched the trees, and was probably coincidental and was also somehow perfect. She saw him and covered the last 30 yards with a slight quickening of pace and came to stand beside him at the railing. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He looked at her. "You okay?" "I'm nervous," she said. Then with characteristic self-awareness, "Which is absurd." "It's not absurd. I run a company. I've presented to federal committees. I've negotiated contracts worth more than most buildings." She looked at the water. "I'm nervous standing at a canal on a Saturday afternoon." "Me too," he said. She looked at him. "You are?" "I have been since Thursday night." Something in her face softened. She turned back to the water and they stood side by side, the canal moving below them, the October light doing what October light did with the particular generosity of a season that knew it was brief. He reached into his coat pocket. "I've been thinking about what to say," he said. "Since August, actually. I had several versions. I considered being eloquent." He paused. "I decided against it." She turned to look at him. He was holding a ring, not a large one, not a dramatic one, a simple band with a single stone that caught the afternoon light without demanding attention, the kind of ring that would last 40 years and still look like itself. She put her hand over her mouth, then lowered it. "I love you," he said. "I love your directness and your impatience and the way you sit in a car when you're thinking through a hard problem. I love that you took a 7-year-old's interrogation seriously and that you answered her question about your worst professional failure honestly. I love that you make birthday cakes with architectural precision and that you texted me about a pigeon and that you sat in your parking garage for 10 minutes because you were scared of something real." He held her gaze. "I love all of it, including the parts that are difficult and the parts you're still figuring out, because I have parts like that too, and you've never asked me to resolve them before you'd stay." Her eyes were bright. The October wind moved through the trees behind them and took the first fallen leaves off the path in a slow drift. "I'm not asking you to change what you've built or to make your life smaller," he said. "I'm asking if you'll let what we have be the foundation the rest of it stands on. For both of us. For Mia." He paused. "Will you marry me?" Sienna looked at him for a long moment, and then she laughed. Not nervously, not the deflective kind, but the real one. The surprised by joy kind, the one that came from somewhere entirely genuine and had nowhere to hide. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes. Completely yes." He put the ring on her finger. His hands weren't entirely steady, which he'd expected and which she noticed and said nothing about. And the ring fit. He'd asked Dana, who had asked Mia, who had apparently measured Sienna's finger with a piece of string during a baking session 3 weeks ago without being asked to, and reported the result with the quiet competence of someone who had been managing the situation from a distance. Sienna looked at the ring on her hand, then at him. "Mia knew," she said. "Mia has known since August. She measured my finger with a string. She told me the next morning. I didn't ask her to." Sienna shook her head slowly. "She's terrifying. She really is. I love her. She loves you." He held her hand. "She told me last week that you were, quote, a suitable addition to the family." Suitable. Sienna repeated the word with an expression that was partly incredulous and partly moved to an extreme that she was managing with incomplete success. I got suitable. From Mia, suitable is the top tier. She called Marcus adequate, and she genuinely likes Marcus. She laughed again. He laughed. They stood at the canal railing in the October light, laughing about a child's rating system, and it was nothing like the proposal scenes in movies. No orchestration, no crowd, no moment designed for a photograph. Just two people at a railing above a slow-moving canal, holding hands, getting over the hardest part and finding that the other side of it was this: warmth and laughter, and the solid, ordinary ground of a life chosen deliberately. He kissed her there at the railing, the city continuing its indifferent business all around them, and when they separated, she pressed her forehead against his briefly and said, "I was ready to ask you, if you'd waited much longer." "I know," he said. "I wanted to get there first." "Competitive." "You have no idea." She pulled back and looked at him. Her eyes were still bright, the ring catching the light when she moved. She looked like someone who had stopped waiting for the ceiling to fall and was, for the first time in a long time, standing completely in the present tense. "What do we do now?" she said. "We go home," he said. "Mia is at Dana's until 5. I told her we'd call when we had news." "She's waiting by the phone." "She's definitely waiting by the phone and pretending to be doing something else." "How did she seem this morning when you left?" "Like someone who has arranged events to her satisfaction and is now managing the rollout timeline." Sienna shook her head, still smiling, and they turned from the railing and walked back up the canal path through the amber and copper light, her hand in his, the water moving below the railing at its own slow, undisturbed pace. They called Mia from the car. She answered on the second ring and said, before either of them spoke, "Well?" Logan looked at Sienna. Sienna looked back at him. "She said yes," Logan said. A pause of approximately 1 second. Then, from the phone, from Mia, the loudest sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that Logan had heard since the night of the science fair. Not quite a scream, not quite a cheer, somewhere between the two, a sound that had no self-consciousness in it at all, just a child's full-volume happiness at something going right. In the background, Dana's voice. "What happened?" And Mia, at full projection. "They're getting married." Logan covered his face with his free hand. Sienna was laughing so hard her shoulders were shaking. "Mia," he managed. "When?" Mia demanded. "How soon? Can I help? Can I pick something?" "Sienna, can I pick something?" "You can absolutely pick something," Sienna said. "I want to pick the flowers." "Done. And I want to make a speech." "Mia," Logan started. "A short one," Mia said. "I've already written notes." He looked at Sienna. Sienna looked back with an expression of helpless affection. "Of course you have," Logan said. "Of course you have, Logan, you." He felt it, the specific weight of his sister's voice saying that on a Saturday afternoon in October, with Sienna beside him and the ring on her finger and Mia in the background already beginning the project of planning a wedding with the focused intensity of someone who has been waiting for a problem worthy of her abilities. "Thanks, Dana," he said. "I'll call you tonight." They drove home through the October afternoon, through the city going about its unhurried Saturday, and the car was full of a particular kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something important and isn't empty but full, dense with what had just happened and what was still arriving. At a red light, Sienna looked at the ring again, just briefly, then she looked out the window. "I want to go back to Henley," she said. "Tonight? Tonight, is that—" "Yes," he said. "Absolutely yes." Impulsen. They went to Henley that evening, just the two of them, the familiar green walls and the plants, and the man behind the counter who nodded like he always did, and had their orders ready before they sat down. They took the same table they'd always taken, the corner one, the good one, and they sat across from each other with their coffee and the particular knowledge of people who have just changed the fundamental structure of their lives. 1 year, Sienna said. 1 year and about 8 hours, he said. She looked around the room, at the walls, the plants, the low speaker in the corner working through something slow and instrumental the way it always had. "I used to come to places like this alone," she said. "Not this place specifically, Just cafes. When the apartment got too quiet, I'd sit by myself and work or read or just sit there and not be in the apartment. I know, he said. You told me that night that your apartment was quiet in a way you weren't in the mood for. She looked at him. You remember the exact phrasing. I remember most of it, he said. I've been over that night a lot. So have I. She traced the edge of her cup with one finger. I remember thinking, in the car, that you were easier to talk to than I expected. And then in here, I remember thinking, she paused, smiling slightly at the memory. I remember thinking that I should be careful, that this was the kind of person who could get through the edges. Did that stop you? Clearly not. Good thing. She looked at her ring again. He watched her look at it. The slight wonder in it, not performed, just the ordinary human response to something new that is also undeniably exactly right. Can I tell you something? She said. Always. I've been thinking about what I was like before October last year, before Marcus's dinner, and I think, she held the thought carefully, I think I'd convinced myself that the personal part was something that would happen later, that I'd build the company to a certain point and then address the rest of it, like it was a project, like I could queue it up and get to it in the next quarter. A lot of people do that, he said. I know. What I don't think I understood until this year is that there is no later that just shows up. Later is made out of the choices you make now. I kept thinking there was a version of the future where everything was already sorted, company stable, personal life intact, everything in its place, and I'd just walk into it. But that's not how it works. No, he said, it isn't. You have to build it while you're still uncertain, while you're still tired, while you still have Tuesday board calls and project delays, and a kid who measures your finger with a string and doesn't tell you why. She looked at him steadily. You have to choose it before you're sure it's safe. That's the only way it becomes safe. He held that, the truth of it, the exact truth of it coming from her in the particular way she gave things, directly, without decoration, earned from something she'd actually lived. That's what this year has been, he said. That's what this year has been, she agreed. He turned his cup in his hands, the familiar weight of it, the familiar room. He thought about the version of himself who had stood at this counter 12 months ago and ordered 2 coffees and chosen the corner table because it was quieter, and who had sat across from a woman he barely knew and talked in a way he hadn't talked to anyone in years. He hadn't known what it was. He'd known it was something. Sometimes that's all you get to know at the start. Sometimes that's enough. I want to say something, he said. She waited. I spent a long time after Claire. He paused, found the right footing. After losing her, I spent a long time thinking my job was to be steady, to hold everything in place, to make sure Mia had a father who wasn't broken, who had his life organized, who showed up. And that was right, for a while. That was what was needed. He looked at his coffee. But at some point, steady became the whole thing. I stopped imagining anything beyond it. Not out of grief exactly, more out of habit. The habit of not wanting things for yourself that might not work out. I know that habit, she said quietly. I know you do. He looked at her. You walked through my defenses without trying to. That's the thing I think about. I wasn't looking for anything. I was standing on a porch in the rain trying to find my car. And you were there, and something about you made me want to sit in a cafe until the man behind the counter started stacking chairs. He paused. I think the right things don't always announce themselves. I think sometimes they just show up on a rainy Thursday, looking for a ride. She looked at him for a long moment. The room was quiet around them, the way it had been quiet that first night, the way it had always been quiet here, their cafe, their corner table, the place where they had both, without planning it, put down enough of their weight to find the other person waiting on the other side. The right things don't announce themselves, she repeated. I'm going to carry that. Good. You can have it. She smiled, reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not dramatically, just the placement of one hand on another, the simple weight of it, the warmth. They stayed until the man behind the counter started stacking chairs, which was the same signal as last year, and which neither of them pointed out, because some things don't need to be said to be completely understood. But The wedding was in the following spring, on a Saturday in May when the city was in full bloom and the light was the particular generous light of a late spring afternoon that makes everything it touches look a little more like itself. They kept it small. That had been the first and easiest agreement. Not a production, not a public event, not the kind of wedding that belonged to the profile rather than the people. Just family and close friends. A room that was warm and unhurried. A ceremony that said exactly what it needed to say, and nothing extra. Dana cried through most of it, which she had predicted and delivered on schedule. Marcus, serving as Logan's best man, managed to give a toast that was genuinely funny and only slightly embarrassing and ended on something true that made everyone in the room fall quiet for a moment in the way a room does when something honest has been said without apology. And Mia, age 8 3/4, gave a speech. It was, as promised, short. She stood at the front of the room in the dress she had selected herself, deep blue, specific, with her notes in one hand and the full professional attention she brought to everything, and she looked out at the assembled people and said, "My dad is the best person I know. He's been taking care of me my whole life, and I think he's been waiting a long time for someone to take care of him back, even a little. Sienna does that. She also makes very good cake, and she answers my questions seriously, which most adults don't do." She looked at Sienna directly. "I'm glad you came to Marcus's dinner that night. I'm glad you didn't go straight home." She sat down. There was a silence of approximately 3 seconds, and then the room did what rooms do when a child says something true in front of everyone. It broke open with the particular warmth of people who are reminded without warning of what actually matters. Logan looked at his daughter and thought, "She is the best of everything I've done." Then he looked at his wife. The word was new and enormous and completely right, and thought, "She is the best of everything I've chosen." Both things could be true. Both things were true. He'd learned this year to hold 2 true things at once without needing to rank them. Life after the wedding was not a transformation. It was, recognizably, the same life, fuller in its arrangement, more deliberately built, but carrying all the same ordinary weight of any life actually being lived. Sienna continued running Verada. The company moved into a new office space that fall. The Callaway partnership renewed for a second term. 2 junior executives she'd promoted from within proved themselves in ways that let her exhale about the future of the institution she'd built. There were still bad board calls and difficult clients and weeks that asked too much. There were still the Tuesday evenings when she walked through the door of their home. They'd found a place that was neither her penthouse nor his apartment, but a third thing chosen together, with a room for Mia's books and a kitchen with enough counter space and a terrace that faced east, carrying more than she meant to. He still didn't push, still gave her the 20 minutes, still refilled her glass and said the thing that needed to be said and none of the things that didn't. She still asked him, "How are you actually?" in the way that meant she wanted the real answer. He still gave it. That hadn't changed. He didn't think it would. Mia, for her part, adapted to the new configuration with the ease of someone who had anticipated it, managed significant aspects of its arrival, and was now ready to move forward. She called Sienna by her name, not a title, which was Mia's particular way of indicating that a person had been fully admitted. Not my stepmom, just Sienna, the way you name the people who have become part of the furniture of your life. She kept the notebook. She kept the purple ribbon. She filled 3 more notebooks that year, indexed and cross-referenced, on topics ranging from atmospheric science to structural engineering to, in one memorable section, the comparative efficiency of different cake baking methods, which Sienna had contributed to directly and with serious engagement. Logan watched his daughter grow and thought often about what it meant to raise a person. Not the goal of it, which he'd always understood, but the texture of it. The accumulation of small things, the answers you give to questions asked at breakfast, the way you handle the mornings that cost you something, the version of yourself you show when you're tired or scared or uncertain, because children are watching more carefully than anyone, and what they learn from watching is not what you intend to teach, but what you actually are. He thought he'd done okay. Not perfectly. He had a list of things he'd gotten wrong and intended to do differently, and it was not a short list. But okay, well enough that his daughter stood in front of a room full of people and said, "I'm glad you didn't go straight home to the woman his wife had become," and meant it completely. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. On a Thursday in October, almost exactly 2 years after a rainy night and a cafe and a conversation that had started something neither of them had been looking for, Logan and Sienna walked the canal. The trees were in full turn again, the same amber and copper, the light doing the same sideways October thing it always did. Their footsteps on the stone path had the easy, synchronized pace of people who knew each other's rhythms in the physical way, who knew which side to walk on, who adjusted automatically, who slowed without being asked when the other slowed. Mia was with Dana for the weekend. The city moved around them at its usual pace, indifferent to anniversaries, indifferent to everything except its own ongoing existence. They stopped at the railing where they always stopped. The water carried the sky in long, unsteady strips. 2 years, Sienna said. 2 years. She looked at the water. He looked at her. At the ring on her finger and the familiar line of her profile, and the particular way she held herself, which was a little less braced than the woman he'd first met, a little more settled into the weight she carried, more willing to put it down when something asked her to. "Do you ever think about how easily it could have not happened?" she said. "Sometimes," he said. "If Marcus had a different guest list, if the surge pricing hadn't been insane, if you decided the rain wasn't that bad." "I can't walk in the rain. My coat was completely wrong for it." "I know. I noticed." She looked at him sideways. "You noticed my coat." "I noticed you looked like you'd planned a different kind of night," he said, which was true. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the water. Then, "I'm glad it rained." "Me too. I'm glad you offered." It seemed like the right call. She turned from the water and looked at him directly, the way she always looked at things she wanted to see clearly. "What would you have done if I'd said no? In the car? If I'd gotten a cab eventually and gone home?" He thought about it honestly. "Driven home," he said. "Checked on Mia. Made myself a glass of water and stood by the window and thought about that conversation for longer than I should have. And then? Probably nothing," he said. "Probably filed it away as a good hour on a rainy night and gone back to my ordinary life." "That's terrifying," she said. "It's a reminder," he said. "The things that change everything don't look like everything when they're arriving. They look like a question, a small one. Do you want to ride? And you say yes or no, and the whole weight of what follows hangs on it, and you don't know that until much later." She held that for a moment. "So you say yes," she said, "even when you're not sure. You say yes to the small thing in front of you," he said, "and you see what it becomes." She looked at him with the full attention she had been giving him for 2 years, across cafe tables and kitchen counters and canal railings, through board crises and sick kids and Sunday mornings and everything in between. The look that measured and found something worth keeping. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I was already on my way to being lost when I met you," she said. "Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could see, but I had built a life that looked complete from the outside and felt like a waiting room from the inside. Very well organized, very competent, completely hollow in the places that mattered." She paused. "You didn't fix that. I want to be clear. You didn't fix that. I fixed it, but you were the reason I started." He listened. "Watching you with Mia. Watching the way you held things that were hard without pretending they weren't hard. The way you talked about Claire, but not with bitterness, not with performance, just with the plainness of someone who loved a person and lost them and kept going anyway." She looked at her hands on the railing. I thought, that's what it looks like when someone is actually living, not managing, not performing. Living. She looked back at him. "You made me want to live like that." He held that for a long moment. The canal moved below them. The October light fell through the bare-edged trees. "You were already doing it," he said. "You'd been doing hard things for years. You just hadn't had anyone around who could see it." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe we needed each other to remember that the point of building anything, a company, a life, a future, isn't the thing you end up with. It's whether the person you become in the building of it is someone you can live with." He thought about that, about who he'd been becoming, year by year, in the daily work of raising Mia and carrying grief and doing the next thing and the next thing. About how Sienna had arrived not as a rescue, but as a mirror. Someone who showed him the version of himself that was still there, still capable, still worth investing in. There was something true in what she'd said that he wanted to hold on to, not as a lesson to dispense, but as something personal, as something earned. The point isn't who you arrive at, it's who you become in the trying. He'd spent years being afraid of wanting things, afraid of the gap between what you hope for and what actually happens, which is where the cost lives, where you find out what you're made of when things don't go the way you planned them. He'd tried to manage that cost by wanting less, by keeping the space small. Sienna had been afraid of the same thing differently. She'd overfilled the space with work, with structure, with the productive motion of building something that would outlast the loneliness underneath it. Neither approach was wrong exactly. Both had kept them functional and whole through difficult seasons. But both had been a form of waiting. Waiting for something safe enough to risk, waiting for certainty before choosing, waiting for a guarantee that didn't exist and never would. What he knew now, standing at the canal railing with his wife's hand in his and the October city moving around them, was that the guarantee was never the point. The point was the choosing. The daily, unglamorous, entirely ordinary choosing to show up, to stay honest, to make room for another person's difficult and real and incompletely resolved life inside your own. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. "You know what I think?" he said. "Tell me." "I think we've been building the right thing." She looked at him, and then she smiled. The real one, the one that came from somewhere completely genuine and had nowhere to hide. "Yeah," she said. "We have." He put his arm around her. She leaned into it. Below them, the canal moved at its slow, unhurried pace, carrying the October sky in long, unsteady strips. The same water that had been moving past this railing on the night they'd first stood here and said the things that needed to be said. It didn't know what it carried. It just kept moving. They stayed until the light went gold, and then amber, and then the blue dark of early evening. And when they finally turned from the railing and walked back up the path through the October trees, neither of them was in any hurry. They had a home to go back to. They had a Thursday to finish. They had all the ordinary things that meant everything, waiting for them at the end of the path. That was more than enough. That was, in fact, the whole point.